Yo, 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 I'm Rachel GNS Middle. Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name, and my middle name is my last name, and I am here today on behalf of Forbear Theatre to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan operas by very pedantically ranking every element of them, and today we are looking at the dialogue from The Grand Duke, the last of Gilbert and Sullivan's creations, but by no means the least. The way I'll be ranking these scenes is with 5 categories, but I'm actually going to give comedy a bit more weight, just like in Gondoliers. So it's actually going to be out of 60 points. As a reminder, I'm not going to be ranking all of these scenes together in a big long list by their points, otherwise all of these would do better, and that's not very fair. I'm just going to do it like I've been doing my chorus principal roles video, where I just look at all the last places, decide which is the worst, then build it up from there. So that is going to be how I'm doing that. But it's going to be 20 marks for comedy, 10 marks for narrative/sense, a little bit like in Utopia Limited. I want to give a scene credit if I find that it is holding my attention and making things clear, and that if I think a newbie to GNS or someone that had not seen the show before would understand what was going on. Mark out of 10 for beauty/poetry, mark out of 10 for character, and a mark out of 10 for emotional/dramatic impact. So the categories that I don't expect Grand Duke to do very well in are beauty/poetry and emotional/dramatic impact. Even if the Grand Duke has some really dramatic moments, they're not really in the scenes themselves. That's more confined to the songs like The Die Is Cast, like Julia's aria, Lisa's second act aria, and a couple of Ludwig's rest. I was about to gesture to the wall, but I've finally taken those posters with the recits down. So a little bit like Ludwig's aria, yes, Ludwig and his Julia are mated, but there's very little emotion in the scene. So I don't think that's necessarily a drawback, but it does mean that perhaps there will be some scenes in other operas that will beat these scenes purely because they have some kind of emotional dramatic impact, whereas the Grand Duke scenes don't tend to. They tend to be mostly comedic, and wow, they really are very, very funny. I don't know if it's just my sense of humour or if perhaps they're just not often formed with the correct amount of pace, but these scenes are truly some of the funniest scenes in the canon. And I'm not saying that as a big Grand Duke stan who is just determined to push Grand Duke forward as much as I can. There is a reason that I like the Grand Duke, and that is because of this wacky screwball kind of humour. It is just so silly, the way these characters speak. What I actually discovered from doing this video is we all know that Ludwig has the most lines in GNS. There was a very helpful commenter. They did all the legwork for me actually in finding out that yes, indeed Ludwig does have the most lines. But what is really interesting is that so many of Ludwig's lines are asides. If you think about a character like Wilfred in Yeoman of the Guard, who has more asides than anyone else in that opera, I think he has 3. Ludwig has potentially like 30 or 40 of them. So many of Ludwig's lines are so self-aware that I feel they must be spoken directly to the audience. And that's not to say that I think Gilbert was losing faith in his own material. It's just a different kind of show. I remember I was saying to Will in a Utopia dialogue video that I really did feel that Gilbert was losing a little bit of faith in himself. He seemed to be making fun of himself, but not in a very kind way. But in this, it really seems like he's broken this wall and like crossed to this new dimension of comedy. And I think that certainly shows like Patience and Mikado, those are 2 which I would say, just off the top of my head, those ones probably have overall better dialogue than this one. And bear in mind that I've not filmed the Ruddigore ones yet. But apart from those 3, I would put a lot of money on the Grand Duke coming after them for dialogue. Which is odd. The reason it's odd is because so many people, including Rachel as recently as a few years ago, would have thought, oh, Grand Duke music is brilliant, the music is great, the problem is the dialogue. I know a lot of people who've said this, including some of my dearest friends whose opinions I still very much respect, even though they have this opinion. But I would invite especially those people, you know who you are, that in fact the dialogue in The Grand Duke is really good. And its issue, I think, is that people aren't really quite getting how fast-paced it needs to be. I've certainly seen a couple of productions of The Grand Duke where the scenes are just not performed with enough energy. They are slow and they drag. And sometimes directors think the solution is, oh, well, this scene's too long, we need to cut lines. Well, yeah, maybe we should cut a few lines. There are maybe a few places, and I'll point these out as we go along, where maybe a line or two wasn't necessary. But is every line in every other opera truly necessary? Are they more well constructed than this? And actually, I don't think they are. There's this sense that it is known that the Grand Duke dialogue isn't very good, and I really want to try and challenge that today. And the way I've challenged that actually is I have tried to contain within this video every bit of dialogue that there is in the Grand Duke. There is one point where I deliberately didn't because it was a very unfunny list of the way Ludwig could play the Grand Duke, which contained not only racism, but also ableism. So I'm not going to say that line, just going to leave that out. I started saying it, and then when I realised what was in it, I just kind of trailed off and went, okay, I'm not going to say that. And there was another line that I only didn't include because I mistakenly thought that it got in the way of a joke, but I've actually now found a way of inserting it so it doesn't get in the way of that jokes, but I'll explain about that after the scene. So please do sit back, take a deep breath, clear your mind of any preconceptions, and enjoy.
Hello, surely I'm not late. But dear me, you're all at breakfast. Has the wedding taken place? My good girls, one at a time, I beg. Let me understand the situation. As solicitor to the conspiracy to dethrone the Grand Duke, a conspiracy in which the members of this company are deeply involved, I am invited to the marriage of two of its members. I present myself in due course, and I find not only that the ceremony has taken place, which is not of the least consequence, but the wedding breakfast is half eaten, which is a consideration of the most serious importance. But the ceremony has not taken place. We can't get a parson. Can't get a parson? Why, how's that? They're 3 a penny. Oh, it's the old story. The Grand Duke. Ugh. It seems that this little imp has selected this, our wedding day, for a convocation of all the clergy in the town to settle the details of his approaching marriage with the enormously wealthy Baroness von Krakenfeld, and there won't be a parson to be had for love or money until 6 o'clock this evening. And as we produce a magnificent revival of Troilus and Cressida tonight at 7, we have no alternative but to eat our wedding breakfast before we've earned it. So sit down and make the best of it. Oh, I should like to pull his grand ducal ears for him, that I should. He's the meanest, the cruelest, the most spiteful little ape in Christendom. Well, we shall soon be free from his tyranny. Tomorrow the despot is to be dethroned. Hush, rash girl. Know ye not that in alluding to our conspiracy without having first given and received the secret sign, you are violating a fundamental principle of our association?
So first of all, how short and snappy is that? It's getting across exposition in a way that I don't think is confusing. As long as everyone knows their lines and says them clearly, I don't find that in the least bit confusing at all. And obviously I can't act a crowd of people, so really that first speech will be interrupted by a couple of times, so I couldn't portray that. That probably would have made that a little bit funnier. I should have just done that, shouldn't I? You guys would have got a kick out of that. So I think first of all I am going to give this a 7 for narrative/sense. I'm going to give it a 7 rather than an 8 because I do concede that it's a lot of information very quickly, and I don't necessarily know how much of that will have been taken in. However, I do think that there is a certain amount of emotion imparted with this exposition. I'm also going to give that a 7. I think that we really get a very strong sense of how much people hate the Grand Duke right from the get-go. In fact, I am going to give it an 8 for narrative. I think I myself am kind of suffering from this idea that, oh, the Grand Duke's hard, it needs to be dealt with properly, but really? Beauty poetry, I mean, I'm going to give that a 5. There's nothing particularly eloquent in that. Character as well. We certainly get across the character of the chorus very well. And we don't see much from Lisa. The notary isn't really a very memorable character. We don't also see very much of Ludwig. So I'm going to give that a 6, but that is mostly weighted towards just how vibrant the chorus are. So that's great. Comedy. Now, I know we have a lot further to go with comedy. So even though this scene is probably funnier than a lot of scenes in, I don't know, Utopia Limited, I'm going to give it a 6 just because I know that even though maybe just the situation and how fast-paced it is kind of quite funny in itself, and that's why I've given it a 6. There are no jokes that really make me roll around laughing, and there are certainly a lot of those to come. So, in total, oh, I remembered, I meant to be marking comedy out of 20, of course. So I'm actually going to give this an 11. I'm going to start off mildly. It's her confounded mildness. So that gets a 37 out of 60, which doesn't seem like a very good mark, but I'm being deliberately quite harsh because I know we've got quite a long way to go with these scenes, and I'm also not marking them in relation to other scenes in the canon, just scenes in this opera.
Oh, bother the secret sign. I've eaten it until I'm quite uncomfortable. And it's so unwholesome. Why, we should all be as yellow as frogs if it wasn't for the makeup. I suffer as much as any of you. I loathe the repulsive thing. I can't contemplate it without a shudder. But I am a conscientious conspirator, and if you won't give the sign, I will. Poor Martyr. He's always at it, and it's a wonder where he puts it. Now, about Troilus and Cressida, what do you play? If you'll be so obliging to wait until I've got rid of this feeling of warm oil at the bottom of my throat, I'll tell you all about it. Thank you, my dear. It's gone. Well, the piece will be presented on a scale of unexampled magnificence. It's confidently predicted that my appearance as King Agamemnon in a Louis XIV's wig will mark an epoch in the theatrical annals of Pfennig halb Pfennig. I endeavoured to persuade Ernest Dunkhoff, our manager, to lend us the classical dresses for our marriage. Think of the effect of a real Athenian wedding procession cavorting through the streets of Speisesel, torches burning, cymbals banging, flutes tootling, cithara twanging, and a throng of 50 lovely Spartan virgins capering before us all down the high street singing Eloia, Eloia, Epopanax, Eloia. It would have been tremendous. And he declined. He did. On the prosaic grounds that it might rain and the ancient Greeks didn't carry umbrellas. I'm sure he'll make a lovely Grand Duke. How he will stage manage the processional. And won't it make Julia Jellicoe jealous? That Englishwoman has always rejected his advances hitherto, but now I fancy the tables will be turned, and he'll reject hers. The pretentious little London cockney. There's nobody good enough for her. Bah! Ernest's a stick, a very stick. And what a part it is. What a chance for an actor who is really a master of stage resource. If, as is confidently predicted, Ernest Dunkhoff is elected to succeed the dethroned one, mark my words, he will make a mess of it. He's sure to be elected. His entire company has promised to plump for him on the understanding that all the places about the court are filled by members of his troupe according to professional precedents. Here comes Ernest Dunkhoff. Now we shall know all about it. Well, what's the news? How is the election going? Oh, it's a certainty, a practical certainty. 2 of the candidates have been arrested for debt, and the 3rd is a baby in arms. So, if you keep your promises and vote solid, I am cocksure of election. Trust to us. But you remember the conditions? Yes, you shall all be provided for life. Every man shall be ennobled, every lady shall have unlimited credit at the court milliners, and all salaries shall be paid weekly in advance. Oh, it's quite clear he knows how to rule a Grand Duchy. Rule a Grand Duchy? Why, my good girl, for 10 years past I've ruled a theatrical company. A man who can do that can rule anything. So, I wonder if anyone other than me has the greatest difficulty in saying flutes tootling. I kept going fruits tootling. I think it still sounds like I'm saying fruits. I just can't say flutes.
flutes tootling. I don't know why I was having trouble with that. Also, the word salaries. And all salaries, and all salaries. I kept going, Saralies. And I literally had to film those two things like 8 times. So yeah, I wonder if anyone else has struggled with those, or if it really is just me. Interesting. Anyway, this is a scene where you'll notice that I put a little bit of like extra dialogue back into it. I didn't put all of it in because this was the one where Ludwig starts to go down a path that's a bit weird and racist and ableist, so I did not include the whole line. And as you can see, I maybe had a little bit of trouble getting back into what is recognised to be the script, so that little, because I think I actually filmed the original first and I tried to put in the other bit later and just insert it in. So the transition into, mark my words, if Ernest is made Grand Duke, he will make a mess of it. So I definitely, that needs a bit of cleaning up, and I'm not really sure I would include that line. I do like Ernest the Stick. He's a very stick. I'm going to definitely use that line somewhere when I next do it. I don't know if I'd use the Julia Jellicoe speech. I don't know if I'd use that because perhaps it was cut for a good reason. I think what I'm just trying to show you guys is that even if you contain every scrap of dialogue, it still reads pretty well as like a very good scene. I think this is quite a bit funnier than the other one, mostly for Ludwig's astoundingly beautiful speech in the middle where I couldn't say flutes. It would have been tremendous. And he declined. He did. It's just gone. All the tension's gone. And I love that. And that is something that is just mathematically funny when you build and build and build and build and build and build the tension, and then it's gone. And I think people can sometimes be tempted to throw lines away in moments like that, but you must let them hear the words he did. Otherwise, you lose the sense of it. But the energy in this scene is so funny. And you really get an idea about who Ludwig is as well. Again, not so much Lisa. Lisa has so few lines in this show at all. Her job is really to get across who she is without having to say anything, which, of course, for people like me, it's not much of a problem. But it does mean that if you have cast a Lisa just because she's got a very pretty voice, like don't just assume that's enough. Like, you're going to have to give Lisa a lot of help if you're directing this show, because there's not really much for her to work off of, and there's not many opportunities for her to be funny either. However, I love the line, "Poor martyr, he's always at it and it's a wonder where he puts it." Because to me, it sounds just rude enough that it's funny, but not rude enough that it's crass. It's just like a vaguely silly sounding / rude sounding thing. But funnily enough, this is like a place where I think that my humour doesn't really quite match with other people's, because I delivered that line the exact same way, like every single night of the Grand Duke run and at Harrogate, and nobody ever laughed. And it's funny to me because, like, my delivery of that line makes me laugh, but no one else seemed to find it funny. And that's where I think, oh God, maybe I am just a bit different to other people, and maybe my humour's too different. But then enough of my other jokes land that I know that I must be quite funny. So maybe someone can explain to me why that isn't funny and like help me, because as a director, I'd like to know, maybe there's just something really subtle I'm doing that's making it not funny. Tell me, let me know why. I've given it a 15 for comedy. As I say, it's mostly for that big Ludwig speech in the middle, but also everyone's just being quite funny. We should all be as yellow as frogs if it wasn't for the makeup. It's so unwholesome. I've eaten 3 today and I can't have any breakfast. It's just such a ridiculous situation. And then when Ernest comes on, Ernest's pre-song line is one of my favourite lines. "My good girl, for 10 years past, I've ruled a theatrical company. A man who can do that can rule anything." There are so many lines here, and I think Ludwig has most of them, as I alluded to in the intro, where I think that they're expected slightly to break the fourth wall. These are more like panto characters. Whereas I have always been very clear throughout all these dialogue videos that you must speak as if what the character is saying is the truth. So you make their character whatever it has to be for the lines they're saying to be the truth. However, the Grand Duke lines are so wacky and avant-garde that in order to make it the truth, there has to be like an air of unreality. And as the prince later alludes to by talking about this air of unreality, how they're not wholly convincing, I kind of think that was intentional. And maybe that's the reason why a lot of people haven't really got Grand Duke. But I do think it is meant to be a fourth wall breaky show. Apart from certain characters, like Julia very rarely does it. Lisa does it a lot. The notary does it, the ignorance of the laity, So many characters are just breaking this fourth wall all over the shop and think they hardly ever do it in like Yeoman or something. And even in Mikado, you could just argue that the characters are just soliloquizing to the ether. But in Grand Duke, they're very much talking to us. They're very much trying to get something across that's beyond the story they're telling. And I love that. Because if you can just do it with energy and conviction, it'll come across. I gave this one also an 8 for narrative/sense. I think they're doing a really good job of continuing the story. And I gave it a 9 for beauty/poetry. That monologue that Ludwig has is absolutely amazing, with a throng of 50 lovely Spartan virgins. And how it's just completely deflated afterwards. It makes it so funny. So that's an example of where the beauty of that speech was an active component in its comedic value. And that's awesome. Character, I gave a 7. We're really getting to know the kind of person Ludwig is here. Like, he's a warm person. He's not at all mean. He's very self-centered. But I also think that he's constantly trying to please people as well. So his life is about him and performing and being funny. He's actually not unlike Jack Point. Because even when all the awful stuff happens to him, he's not quite able to pull himself out of the act. You can definitely see him become drier and drier throughout the piece. And that's what I played around with. I tried to make Ludwig more and more relaxed throughout the show as he just kind of gives in to all the stuff that's going on around him. And that's why Ludwig is such a good example of a character that has an arc. Because you can see it dawn on him what his actions have done. And it's not even, you can't even say that he did anything truly morally blameworthy. I mean, I would say that in the Act 1 finale, he could very easily have said, well, I don't want to marry Julia, I want to marry Lisa, so I guess I'll just abdicate. Julia can just rule, I'm out of here, I'm marrying Lisa. But he didn't do that. But the thing is, I don't think that makes him necessarily a bad person. It just makes him, maybe he should have thought of his priorities a bit better. But no, he's certainly not bad. I really love Ludwig. And I gave it a 7 for emotional dramatic impact, just because Ludwig is so dramatic. The presence of Ludwig alone makes this scene quite dramatic, not emotional, but just his clear negative attitude towards Ernest is so exaggerated, and it's also very funny.
Elected by my fellow conspirators to be Grand Duke of Fenwick-Halfening as soon as the contemptible little occupant of the historical throne is deposed. Here is promotion indeed. Why, instead of playing Troilus of Troy for a month, I shall be Grand Duke of Fenwick-Halfening for a lifetime. Yet am I happy? No. Far from happy. The lovely English comedienne, the beautiful Julia, whose dramatic ability is so overwhelming that our audiences forgive even her strong English accent. That rare and radiant being treats my respectful advances with disdain unutterable. And yet, who knows? She is haughty and ambitious, and it may be that the splendid change in my fortunes may work a corresponding change in her feelings towards me. Lady Dungov, a third monsieur, if you please. Beautiful English maiden! No compliments, I beg. I desire to speak with you on a purely professional matter. So we will, if you please, dispense with allusions to my personal appearance, which can only tend to widen the breach which already exists between us. My only hope shattered. The haughty Londoner still despises me. It shall be as you will. I understand that the conspiracy in which we are all concerned is to develop tomorrow, and that the company is likely to elect you to the throne on the understanding that the posts about the court are to be filled with members of your theatrical troupe, according to their professional importance.
That is so.
Then all I can say is that it places me in an extremely awkward position.
I don't see how it concerns you.
Why, bless my heart, don't you see that as your leading lady, I am bound under a serious penalty to play the leading part in all of your productions?
Well?
Why, of course, the leading part in this production will be the Grand Duchess.
My wife?
That is another way of expressing the same idea.
I scarcely dared even to hope for this.
Of course, as your leading lady, you'll be mean enough to hold me to the terms of my agreement.
Oh, certainly.
Oh, that's so like a man. Well, there is no help for it. I will have to do it.
She's mine. But do you really think you would care to play that part?
Care to play it? Certainly not. But what am I to do? Business is business, and I am bound by the terms of my agreement.
It's for a long run, mind. A run that may last many, many years. No understudy. And once embarked upon, there's no throwing it up.
Oh, we are used to these long runs in England. They are the curse of the stage. But you see, I've no option.
You think the part of the Grand Duchess will be good enough for you?
Oh, I think so. It was a good part in Gerolstein, and oughtn't to be a bad one in Pfennig. Why? What did you suppose I was going to play?
But considering your strong personal dislike to me and your persistent rejection of my repeated offers, won't you find it difficult to throw yourself into the part with all the impassioned enthusiasm that the character seems to demand? Remember, it's a strongly emotional part, involving long repeated scenes of rapture, tenderness, adoration, devotion, all in luxuriant excess, and all of the most demonstrative description.
My good sir, throughout my career, I have made it a rule never to allow private feelings to interfere with my professional duties. You may be quite sure that, however distasteful the part may be, if I undertake it, I shall consider myself professionally bound to throw myself into it with all the ardour at my command.
I'm the happiest fellow alive. Now, would you have any objection to give me some idea, if it's only a mere sketch, as to how you would play it? It would be really interesting to me to know your conception of the part of my wife.
How would I play it? Now, let me see. Ah, I have it.
I'm already slightly regretting putting Princess Ida as the best soprano character. I think the reason I put her above Julia and Elsie, in fact Elsie I also put above Julia, is because I felt that Julia didn't have like this really strong character arc. However, that's the only way I think in which Julia isn't quite as good as Princess Ida or Elsie. And when I think back to Princess Ida's dialogue, I mean, it was nowhere near as good as this. Nowhere near. And Elsie, you know, she has some good dialogue, but Julia Jellicoe is undoubtedly the best soprano when it comes to dialogue and just character. So not necessarily like character motivation or reality, but just in terms of the stuff the actor gets to do on stage. Julia's just the best. I have had the greatest fortune in getting to play Julia more than anybody alive today. If you would like to contradict that, please challenge that. I will listen to you. At the moment, I have performed Julia 12 times professionally. So I'm talking about individual performances. 12 times professionally. Then 3 extra times as an amateur. So that brings it to 15. And then another time as an amateur. So that brings it to 16. And when I revive my Grand Duke, I'll be doing it again. So if anyone else has performed Julia 16 times or more, Let me know. I think I've certainly performed her more professionally than anyone else alive today. The only other person who I believe has performed Julia Jellicoe professionally twice has been Charlotte Page, but I believe that the number of performances she didn't equal the number of performances I've done. So I win. I mean, it's good I'm going to win something, isn't it? But anyway, what I mean to say is that I know this part inside out. I think it's quite obvious by how comfortable I am in reading the lines that I know this part extremely well. And I will say that it is harder, I think, to make this part real. In order to make the lines the truth, you do have to be weird, like super weird, like not a real person weird. And the only way I can describe Julia in real terms is that she's highly ambitious, completely socially oblivious, maybe even slightly sociopathic. Because I don't really see Julia as mean. She is just completely deluded and self-obsessed. To me, that's funnier. I don't like seeing Julia like really lose her temper. I like seeing it when she's obviously angry, but she is just trying to hold it in. I find that so much funnier than when people are just like, ah, 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 and like shouting at her. Like, I don't get, why is that funny? I just don't tend to find outward anger very funny. But Julia is very ostentatious, very flamboyant. She's fabulous, obviously. She's a very good actor, but in a very specific kind of way. This scene is very funny. In fact, even Ernest's opening speech is very funny, and the poetry in it is very good. It's aesthetically very pleasing to say. I had a lot of fun just saying that line. But am I happy? No, far from happy. It's just that shift of emotion, that sudden change of emotion. It's great. We love changes of emotion. And the fact that it slowly dawns on Ernest that he's going to get to marry Julia. So you get to see him at the height of emotion. You get to see her just totally oblivious and businesslike. She's probably ace as well, Julia, which is why I really like her. Apart from maybe there's a moment where you think she's getting a bit of a kick out of being Ernest's widow later, but even that could just be a dramatic kick. It doesn't need to be at all sexual. Julia's definitely a character for me that is like top of my list for should be played ace. As in, none of her actions in the slightest bit are motivated by romance, sex, or attachment. It is purely about herself and getting to play a part. And that's really interesting because I think every other character you play is either driven by wanting a certain person, like wanting their attention, wanting to marry them, or is something else entirely, but is hindered by the fact that they like someone else, like in the case of Princess Ida. So that's a little bit more interesting. Ida's a bit more interesting than the kind of more conventional first type. But to see a character who is just completely devoid of any romantic or sexual motivation whatsoever is very interesting. And that's the reason I love Julia, because you can really play on her asexuality and total social obliviousness, and the fact that she is a very good actor, but she is totally unable to form any kind of connections with anyone else. And just as a side note, I am by no means implying that asexuals don't feel any kind of romantic connection. It's just that Julia is very asexual, very aromantic, I should say, as well, and is kind of vaguely sociopathic. But those three things do not always come together. Hopefully that was clear by what I said. But it is now. So comedy, I mean, this it really is very, very funny. There is one line that I don't really get why other people find it so funny, and that is another way of expressing the same idea. Because that is another line where, conversely, whenever I've said that line, it's always got a laugh, but I never really find that line that funny. Oh, and it was a good part in Gerolstein and oughtn't to be a bad one in Pfennig halb Pfennig. What did you suppose I was going to play? She is just brilliant. And Ernest is so funny. She's mine, you know, it's all his little asides. He's so flamboyant and romantic. I love Ernest. Ernest is such a soft part. He is so gentle. That's why I love Ernest. I know actually a lot of tenors don't like Ernest. They have no desire to play him, but I'd certainly love to play Ernest. That's probably the next one on my Grand Duke list, actually, to play Ernest. If anyone would like to cast me as Ernest, if you for some reason didn't want to cast me as Julia. Narrative/sense. We don't really have too much narrative in this, apart from just understanding that Ernest and Julia kind of have a thing. But I'm going to give it a 7 because I think it's also really nice that we got a bit of a break from that. We're very focused on one point. That is, if they go through with this plot, Julia will end up being the Grand Duchess. And that's like the only thing the scene's about. So that's nice because it gives you a chance to focus on the comedy and the character. And hey, I'm going to give this a 9 for character. I think we really get to the bottom of who Ernest and Julia are extremely quickly. Yes, Kitty. Emotional dramatic impact, I'd say that because we get those lovely responses from Ernest, I am also going to give it a 7. Beauty/poetry, some of those lines really do trip off the tongue nicely. In fact, Ernest's speech, I think, alone gets it an 8. So that is what that scene gets. And totting up the points has a 48. So that scene is winning so far. What a great scene. Love this one.
Well, a nice mess you've got us into. There's an end of our precious plot. All up, pop, fizzle, bang, done for. Yes, but ha! Fancy my choosing the Grand Duke's private detective, of all men, to make a confidant of. When you come to think of it, it's really devilish funny. When you come to think of it, it's extremely injudicious to admit into a conspiracy every pudding-headed baboon who presents himself. Ludwig is far from being a baboon. Poor boy, he couldn't help giving us away. It's his trusting nature. He was deceived. His trusting nature. Oh, if I could talk to you in my own language for 5 minutes, only 5 minutes. I know some good, strong, energetic English remarks that would shrivel your trusting nature into raisins. Only you wouldn't understand, Sam. Here we perceive one of the disadvantages of a neglected education. And I suppose you'll never be my Grand Duchess now. My good friend, if you don't produce the piece, how can I play the part? True. You see what you've done. But, my dear sir, you don't seem to understand that the man ate 3 sausage rolls. Keep that fact steadily before you. 3 large sausage rolls. Bah! Plenty of people eat sausage rolls who are not conspirators. Well, they shouldn't. It's bad form. When one of the human family proposes to eat a sausage roll, it is his duty to ask himself, am I a conspirator? And if on examination he finds that he is not a conspirator, he is bound in honour to select some other form of refreshment. Of course he is. One should always play the game. What are you grinning at, you greedy old man? Nothing. Don't mind me. It is always amusing to the legal mind to see a passive layman bothering themselves about a matter which to a trained lawyer presents no difficulty whatever. No difficulty? None whatever. The way out of it is quite simple. Simple? Certainly. Now attend. In the first place, you 2 men fight a statutory duel. A statutory duel. A statutory duel? Oh, what a cracked your language this German is. Never heard of such a thing. It is true that the practice has fallen into abeyance through disuse, but all the laws of Felikalpfening run for 100 years, when they die a natural death, unless in the meantime they are being revived for another century. The act that institutes a statutory duel was passed 100 years ago, and as it has never been revived, it expires tomorrow, so you're just in time. But what is the use of talking to us about a statutory duel when we none of us know what a statutory duel is? Don't you? Then I'll explain. I see. Then the man that draws the lowest card dies ipso facto a social death. He loses his civil rights, his identity disappears, the revising barrister expunges his name from the list of voters, and the winner takes his place, whatever it may be, discharges all his functions and adopts all his responsibilities. This is all very well as it goes, but it only protects one of us. What's to become of the survivor? Yes, that's an interesting point, because I might be the survivor. The survivor goes at once to the Grand Duke, and, in a burst of remorse, denounces the dead man as the moving spirit of the plot. He is accepted as King's evidence, and, as a matter of course, receives a free pardon. Tomorrow, when the law expires, the dead man will ipso facto come to life again. The revising barrister will restore his name to the list of voters, and he will resume all his obligations as though nothing unusual had happened. Then he will be at once arrested, tried, and executed on the evidence of the informer. Candidly, my friend, I don't think much of your plot. Dear, 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 the ignorance of the laity. My good young lady, it is a beautiful maxim of our glorious constitution that a man can only die once. Death expunges crime, and when he comes to life again, it will be with a clean slate. It's really very ingenious. My dear sir, we owe you our lives.
May I kiss him?
Certainly not. You're a big girl now. Well, miscreant, are you prepared to meet me on the field of honour? At once. By Jove, what a couple of fire-eaters we are.
Ludwig doesn't know what fear is.
Oh, I don't mind this sort of duel. It's not like a duel with swords. I hate a duel with swords. It's not the blade I mind, it's the blood. And I hate a duel with pistols. It's not the ball I mind, it's the bang. Altogether, it is a great improvement on the old method of giving satisfaction.
What this scene is giving me, if I can use a kind of Gen Z phrase, it's giving Act 2 of The Mikado when the trio have just been sentenced to death. And it even starts with a similar line. That's where the comparison struck me, but it just does have that kind of tone to it. It does have this sense of the same comedy chaos that Mikado has. And I'm finding The Mikado and the Grand Duke really quite similar. Ever since I did the video where me and Dan and a couple of total GNS newbies ranked which they thought was the best story, it did occur to me that the Mikado and the Grand Duke do have quite a similar feeling to them in some respects, and this low stakes chaos. So even though it is utter life or death, the characters are not necessarily behaving like that, especially Ludwig. It's well, when you come to think of it, it's really devilish funny. It's you are going to die. That's where the humour comes from it. And I think in Mikado it's quite similar, because all these characters are talking quite matter-of-factly. Oh, what about your right arm and your Snickers sleep? Well, never mind that now. It's very similar in tone. It's very much like that scene. And in the scene, in fact, before that, when the Patter guy is trying to orchestrate everything, the scene that me and Will really, really loved. The close thing that, for here he comes, when Mikado comes on. So it's similar in tone. The only lines I would maybe consider cutting would be that end section where, it's not the ball I mind, but the bang. But I know Will likes that, so perhaps Will you can say in the comments, Will, why you really love those lines. Certainly I've not hated the way you've ever delivered them, Will. It's just I don't really think they add anything. But honestly, apart from that, this scene is an utter roller coaster. I adore this scene. It contains probably my favourite line to say in the whole canon, which is the line that Julia says about raisins. Honestly, the whole scene is just utter jokes from start to finish. Every single line people say is funny. All the interjections with the notary, that's great. Everything, even the bit that's often cut with the, well, they shouldn't, it's bad form. When a person is presented with the opportunity of eating a sausage roll, he should first ask himself if he is a conspirator. I love that line. I used to not like it, but then Will convinced me to keep it in my version. I'm actually really glad I did. That is really funny. The raisins bit is funny. Lisa kind of supporting him. Yes, one should always play the game. And then just the details about the statutory duel when Ludwig just kind of chimes in. Well, that's a very good point, because I might be the survivor. every single thing that these characters say is so related to the kind of person they are. These lines are just as skillfully written for the characters in mind saying them than any of the other operas. In fact, maybe even better than some operas. Ludwig as a character, like, he is just so vivid. Julia is so vivid. Ernest is so vivid. I think even Lisa is vivid, even if she's just a little bit wet. And the notary, even he, like, is... He does come off the page in a way that not many of these secondary characters do. He's certainly very pleased with himself at having come up with this. And, oh, no, nothing, I'm just amusing myself, you know. He's quite sassy. I do love a sassy notary. But this scene, I mean, I don't know if this gets the 20 for comedy. I think this one maybe gets a 19. I think there's one more scene that I think is slightly funnier than this one. But honestly, this is absolute comedy gold. I love every moment of this scene. My dear sir, you don't seem to understand that the man ate 3 sausage rolls. Keep that fact steadily before your mind. 3 large sausage rolls. Just that whole little section. Plenty of people eat sausage rolls, so we're not conspirators. Well, they shouldn't. It's bad form. It's just so funny. What a crackjaw language this German is. And also, this scene gets across a ton of exposition. This scene is when you find out what a statutory duel is. There's so much going on in this scene. Narrative sense, I'm going to give that a 9. I mean, I think that... Bear in mind also this is actually 2 scenes, so this is not one scene. I just didn't see the point of judging them both separately because it's the same 5 people. So I've judged them as one. Beauty/poetry. And the raisin speech, I mean, that's just glorious. But a lot of the lines are just kind of more conversation. So I'll give it an 8. I'll give it a tentative 8. And character, like, honestly, I'm going to give this a 10. The characters just absolutely leap off the page for me. Emotional, dramatic impact. Well, yeah, they're at the height of emotion. They've just been effectively sentenced to death. It's just like the Mikado scene. It's the Mikado chaos, but in Act 1 rather than Act 2. Like, we're suddenly there. We are rocketing along with this story. Stuff is happening. Yeah, there's a lot of exposition still to get out of the way, but these characters are going through stuff. Why do people not like the Grand Duke? I'm genuinely fascinated by it. I don't know why people don't like it. Have you just seen bad productions? Have you just seen productions where the director doesn't like the show and just feels like they have to do it?
My Lord Chamberlain, as you are aware, my marriage with the wealthy Baroness von Krakenfeld will take place tomorrow, and you will be good enough to see that the rejoicings are on a scale of unusual liberality. Pass that on. The sports will begin with a wedding breakfast bee. The leading pastry cooks of the town will be invited to compete, and the winner will not only enjoy the satisfaction of seeing his breakfast devoured by the Grand Ducal pair, but he will also be entitled to have the arms of Fenny-Culpering tattooed between his shoulder blades. The Vice-Chamberlain will see to this. All the public fountains of Speisersell will run with ginger beer, Heim and currant vine milk at the public expense. The Assistant Vice-Chamberlain will see to this. At night, everybody will illuminate, and as I have no desire to tax the public funds unduly, this will be done at the inhabitants' private expense. The Deputy Assistant Vice-Chamberlain will see to this. All my Grand Ducal subjects will wear new clothes, and the Sub-Deputy Assistant Vice-Chamberlain will collect the usual commission on all sales. Wedding presents, which on this occasion should be on a scale of extraordinary magnificence, will be received at the palace at any hour of the 24, and the temporary Sub-Deputy Assistant Vice-Chamberlain will sit up all night for this purpose. The entire population will be commanded to enjoy themselves, and with this view, the acting temporary sub-deputy assistant vice-chamberlain will sing comic songs in the marketplace from noon till nightfall. Finally, we have composed a wedding anthem with which the entire population are required to provide themselves. It can be obtained from our Grand Ducal publishers at the usual discount price, and all the chamberlains will be expected to push the sale. I don't feel at all comfortable. I hope I'm not doing a foolish thing and getting married. After all, It's a poor heart that never rejoices, and this wedding of mine is the first little treat I've allowed myself since my christening. Besides, Caroline's income is very considerable, and as her ideas of economy are quite on a par with mine, it ought to turn out well. Bless her tough old heart. She's a mean little darling. Oh, here she is, punctual to her appointment.
Rudolph! Why, what's the matter?
Why, I'm not quite myself, my pet. I'm a little worried and upset. I want a tonic. It's the low diet, I think. I am afraid, after all, I shall have to take the bull by the horns and have an egg with my breakfast.
I shouldn't do anything rash, dear. Begin with the jujube.
I'll keep it for supper.
Rudolph, don't! What in the world are you thinking of?
I was thinking of embracing you, my sugar plum, just as a little cheap treat.
What, here? In public? Really, you appear to have no sense of delicacy.
No sense of delicacy? Bonbon.
No, I can't make you out. When you courted me, all your courting was done publicly in the marketplace. When you proposed to me, you proposed in the marketplace. And now that we're engaged, you seem to desire that our first tete-a-tete should occur in the marketplace. Surely you've a room in your palace, with blinds, that would do.
But my own, I can't help myself. I'm bound by my own decree.
Your own decree?
Yes, you see, all the houses that give on the marketplace belong to me, but the drains, which date back to the reign of Charlemagne, want attending to, and the houses wouldn't let. So, with a view to increasing the value of the property, I decree that all love episodes between affectionate couples should take place, in public, on this spot, every Monday, Wednesday and Friday, when the band doesn't play.
Bless me, what a happy idea! So moral too. And have you found it answer?
Answer? The rents have gone up 50%, and the sale of opera glasses, which is a grand ducal monopoly, has received an extraordinary stimulus. So, under the circumstances, would you allow me to put my arm around your waist as a source of income, just once?
But it's so embarrassing. Think of the opera glasses.
My good girl, that's just what I am thinking of. Hang it all, we must give them something for their money. What's that?
It's a letter which my detective asked me to hand to you. I wrapped it up in yesterday's paper to keep it clean.
Oh, it's only his report. That'll keep. But I say, you've never been and bought a newspaper.
My dear Rudolph, do you think I'm mad? It came wrapped around my breakfast.
I thought you were not the sort of girl to go and buy a newspaper. Well, as we've got it, we may as well read it. What does it say?
Why, dear me, here's your biography. Our detested despot.
Yes, I fancy that refers to me.
And it says, oh, it can't be.
What can't be?
Why, it says that although you're going to marry me tomorrow, you were betrothed in infancy to the Princess of Monte Carlo.
Oh, yes, that's quite right. Didn't I mention it?
Mention it? You never said a word about it.
It's so like me. Well, it doesn't matter, because, you see, it's practically off.
Practically off?
Yes. By the terms of the contract, the betrothal is void unless the princess marries before she is of age. Now, her father, the prince, is stony broke and hasn't left the house for years for fear of arrest. Over and over again he has implored me to come to him to be married, but in vain. Over and over again he has implored me to advance him the money to enable the princess to come to me, but in vain. I am very young, but not as young as that. And as the princess comes of age at 2 tomorrow, why, at 2 tomorrow I'm a free man, so I appointed that hour for our wedding, as I should like to have as much marriage as I can get for my money.
I see. Of course, if the married state is a happy state, it's a pity to waste any of it.
Why, every hour we delayed I should lose a lot of you, and you'd lose a lot of me.
My thoughtful darling. Oh, Rudolph, we ought to be very happy.
If I'm not, it'll be my first bad investment. Still, there is such a thing as a slump even in matrimonials.
I often picture us in the long, cold, dark December evenings, sitting close to each other and singing impassioned duets to keep us warm,
and thinking of all the lovely things we could afford to buy if we chose, and at the same time planning out our lives in the spirit of the most rigid and exacting economy. It's the most beautiful and touching picture of connubial bliss in its highest and most rarefied development.
So, this scene. Now, I have often seen this scene fall completely flat. And I do admit that it can be problematic unless you have amazing actors. I think this may be why people don't think they like the Grand Duke, because typically when a show is being cast, it's cast by voice type and not often with actors in mind. Or if there are maybe like two people that you're between for a part, it'll often go to the person with the better voice. And I think that in this show in particular, that can be really dangerous. You need, in this show, to cast somebody who is absolutely fabulous as both of these parts. Because both of these parts are fabulous. And I think that if I were now to refilm that, I think I would play Rudolph a little differently. Unsurprisingly, I've never actually read Rudolph's lines before. And it took me, it took me quite a lot of the scene for me to kind of get into it. In fact, I don't really think I kind of got him quite until the following speech and then even the following scene with Ludwig. So I did find that I kind of struggled getting into him a bit. I struggled to kind of really make him shine. But the Baroness, she is so fabulous, but I've often seen people play these parts who just, forgive me, maybe should not have been cast as those roles. It requires such a presence because the thing is, this is a long scene. And what they're talking about could be really boring if it's not given life by the actors. The comedy here is less in the lines themselves and just in how you can read them as actors. And I don't really think it's like crazy funny. I'm going to give it a 12 out of 20 for comedy. I do like the bit about you've not gone and bought a newspaper. I like that. I like it where he doesn't eat the jujube. I often change it to jelly bean because Bradley has said that it's an edible berry-like drupe, the fruit of various species of the Ziziphus plant. Mediterranean, China, North Africa. Huh, I didn't know that. I used to say jelly bean because people know what that is. I love jelly beans at the moment. I'm addicted to jelly beans. When he's saying about taking the bull by the horns and having an egg with his breakfast, and a bit about her discovering the Princess of Monte Carlo. Oh, didn't I mention it? I never said a word about it. This is a scene where, depending on how we were for time, if I was doing the Grand Duke again, which I hope to be doing really soon, I would try as best as I could to keep all the material in and just make it really snappy. But I do think that first section about embracing and the opera glasses and the houses on the marketplace, that would be a candidate for cutting, in my opinion. Not because it's not good, I think it's nice and it does show you who the characters are, but in the interest of keeping the story moving and keeping the scene not really long, it might be something good to cut, just to give the characters like a bit more of a chance to not bore the audience. Because it is hard work and it really does take magnificent actors to make this scene not boring. And I was lucky enough to have just been in the Grand Duke where that was the case. As I had the amazing Emma Retty, who did the alto arias video with me, and Phil Errington, who is a legend in the GNS community, and they did the scene, and they did it great. I don't think the section about the marketplace and the opera glasses is necessary for the narrative. We get everything that we get from that section from other bits in the scene and the song that follows. It's not necessarily needed for the narrative, so that would be why I may consider just cutting that section. Also, I'd cut the final line, which I've seen most companies do. I don't know why Gilbert added that extra line of Rudolph, but to me, the song obviously starts after the Baroness says, "Planning our lives in the most rigid and exacting economy." That's such a better song intro line than the one Rudolph says. So narrative sense, I'm gonna give it a 6, because I do think that the length of this scene does hamper it slightly, and it does require a lot from the actors and the director to make it really interesting. It's long, man. It's really long. This is the Baroness's first entrance as well, so she's not even like warmed up yet, and suddenly she's on in this massive scene. It's hard. You need someone like Isabel Page or Emma Retty to play this part. Beauty/poetry. There's some nice stuff. I mean, I've not even really talked about the whole speech that Rudolph has with his chamberlains. It is kind of funny, and there's a lot of potential. There's a whole load of potential for hilarious comedy, but because it's not actually written in, I'm not going to increase the comedy mark. But I found it quite easy to say. I'd never read that speech before, but I found it chip off the tongue quite nicely. It flowed. It did have a kind of poetic feel to it. So I'm going to give that a 7 for Beauty/poetry. I do think it does, the language is lovely in itself, not even thinking about the content of the language. Character. We certainly get who the characters are from this scene. If anything, it's almost too much character. So I'm actually going to give it a 9, not a 10, because I actually think they could have used less material to get this information across, and I don't think it's kind of as neat as the other ones have been. Emotional dramatic impact. Again, like, I'm going to give it a 5. I don't know why I should care about these characters, because I'm certainly seeing the Baroness angry, and I think a lot of times like the Baroness will like hit Rudolph with the newspaper, and that's funny, because isn't it funny when women are violent towards men? But yeah, this one gets a 39, which is actually slightly better than the opening scene. But it's just not a scene that I particularly care about emotionally. You don't really care about these characters. So yeah, the Baroness, you do see her angry about the Princess of Monte Carlo, but you don't really care enough about these characters to actually care or sympathise with her about that. I mean, she seems to get over it quite quickly, doesn't she? So yeah, not my favourite scene, but there's some moments that I like in it.
Oh, now for my detective's report. What's this? Another conspiracy? A conspiracy to depose me. And my private detective was so convulsed with laughter at the notion of a conspirator selecting him for a confidant that he was physically unable to arrest the malefactor. Why? It'll come off. This comes of engaging a detective with a keen sense of the ridiculous. For the future, I'll employ none but Scotsmen. And the plot is to explode tomorrow. My wedding day. Oh, Caroline. Caroline. This is perfectly frightful. What's to be done? I don't know. And I'm going to be ill. I know I am. I've been living too low. I'm going to be very ill indeed.
So this character, who we have seen in a huge, like, mammoth of a scene beforehand, was somebody who we weren't being told to like. You know, we weren't being told, oh, this is the person you should root for. However, in this monologue, a good director/actor will make you care for this character. It makes you, like, somewhat slightly root for them, or, like, maybe, you know, you're still hoping for the plot to go ahead, but you're like, oh, that's really sad. But also, it's very, very funny. Considering how short it is, like, I only give it a 15, but those lines, and he was so convulsed with laughter that he found himself physically unable to arrest the malefactor. This is what comes of hiring a detective with a keen sense of the ridiculous. I don't know if that line about Scotchmen is necessary, but I absolutely love that this is what comes of employing a detective with a keen sense of the ridiculous. It's very, very silly. But the thing is, the height of the emotion, if an actor can carry that off, like, really believing that, and, like, really feeling at the height of fear, you know, what's to be done? I don't know. This scene has just everything in it. It's lovely for the narrative. I'm going to give it an 8 for narrative. I'll give it a 7 for beauty/poetry. It's not long enough to have much beautiful language. It's great for Rudolph's character. Give it a 9 for that. Emotional dramatic impact. Hey, I'll give it an 8. I don't really think any scene in this opera is going to get really high for emotional dramatic impact, but It's good, considering this is a very short scene. It's done very well.
Now for my confession and full pardon. They told me the Grand Duke was dancing duets in a marketplace, but I don't see him. Hello, it is the Grand Duke. What are you doing there? Get up, sir. Who are you, sir, who presume to address me in person? If you've anything to communicate, you must fling yourself at the feet of my acting temporary sub-deputy assistant vice-chamberlain. Your communication will, in course of time, come to my august knowledge. But will I inform your highness that in me you see the most unhappy, the most unfortunate, the most completely miserable man in your whole dominion? You, the most miserable man in my whole dominion? How can you have the face to stand there and say such a thing? Why, look at me! Look at me! Well, I wouldn't be a crybaby. A crybaby? If you had just been told that you were going to be deposed tomorrow, and perhaps blown up with dynamite for all I know, wouldn't you be a crybaby? If only I could hit upon some cheap and painless method of putting an end to an existence which has become insupportable, I would unhesitatingly adopt it. You would? I see a magnificent way out of this. By Jupiter, I'll try it. Are you, by any chance, in earnest? In earnest? Why, look at me! If you are really in earnest, if you really desire to escape scot-free from this unspeakably horrible catastrophe without trouble, danger, pain, or expense, why not resort to a statutory duel? A statutory duel? Yes. The act is still in force, but it will expire tomorrow afternoon. You fight, you lose. You are dead for the day. Tomorrow, when the act expires, you will come to life again and resume your Grand Duchy as though nothing had happened. In the meantime, the explosion will have taken place, and a survivor will have had to bear the brunt of it. Yes, that's all very well, but who'll be fool enough to be the survivor? Actuated by an overwhelming sense of attachment to your Grand Ducal person, I unhesitatingly offer myself as the victim of your subject's fury. Oh, that's really very handsome. I dare say being blown up is not nearly as unpleasant as one would think. Oh, yes, it is. It mixes one up awfully. But suppose I were to lose? Oh, that's very easily arranged. I'll put an ace up my sleeve, and you'll put a king up yours. When the drawing takes place, I shall seem to draw the higher card and you the lower. And there you are. But that's cheating. So it is. I never thought of that. Not that I mind, but I say, you won't take an unfair advantage of your day in office. You won't go tipping people or squandering my little savings in fireworks or any nonsense of that sort. I am hurt, really hurt by the suggestion. You wouldn't like to put down a deposit, perhaps? No, I don't think I should like to put down a deposit. Or give a guarantee? A guarantee would be equally open to objection. Very well. I suppose you must have your own way. Good. I say, we must have a devil of a quarrel. Oh, a devil of a quarrel? Just to give colour to the thing. No half measures. Big words, strong language, rude remarks. Oh, a devil of a quarrel. Shall I give you a sound thrashing before all the people? Say the word, it's no trouble. No, I think not. Though it would be very convincing, and it's extremely good and thoughtful of you to suggest it. Still, a devil of a quarrel. Oh, the devil of a quarrel. Now, the question is, how shall we summon the people? Oh, there's no difficulty about that. Bless your heart, they've been staring at us through those windows for the last half hour.
Hello, future Rachel here, by a considerable margin. I mean, not that considerable, like a month or so. I still got my hair in plaits, but now I'm actually in Germany. So, yeah, let me tell you about a couple of things that I missed. Because I came on to talk about this one specific line, but then I found another line as well. So, first of all, in the scene with Rudolph, there is actually an extra line, which I love, and I would always put in. He says, "Oh, Caroline, Caroline, this is perfectly frightful. What's to be done? I don't know. I ought to keep cool and think. But you can't think when your veins are full of hot soda water and your brain's fizzing like a firework and all your faculties are jumbled in a perfect whirlpool of tumblication. That's why would you ever cut that line? It's so good. And the other one that I'd remembered I'd forgotten and that I came specifically to find. And I'm very surprised that this didn't occur to me when filming it, because this is actually one of my favourite lines. So Rudolph says, "Who are you, sir, who presume to address me in person? If you've anything to communicate, you must fling yourself at the feet of my acting temporary sub-deputy assistant vice-chamberlain, who will fling himself at the feet of his immediate superior, and so on, with successive foot-flingings through the various grades. Your communication will, in course of time, come to my august knowledge." And I think that is so good, and I would always have those two lines in. So that's just a little note for any pedants, that I'm a pedant too, and I missed that initially, but I remembered.
Mikado-related revelation number 2 of this video. How similar is this to the scene with the Patagai and the tenor before the Act 1 finale of the Mikado? It's so similar in tone and in comedy. How one party is trying to convince the other party to do something, but then it's slightly like kind of who is mixed up, but in terms of tone, like one party is trying to convince the other to do something that is actually really not the best thing for that person to be doing. And then later in that scene, that same person, it switches in Mikado, but later in that scene, that same person is then trying to kind of get the best deal they can possible out of it. And the other person is trying to kind of weasel out of it slightly. Oh, would you like to put down a deposit? Or, can you do this? Or, no. But then there's this extra added layer of coming in at the end. And this is something I'd not really thought about before, but it really struck me that Ludwig is suggesting having a devil of a quarrel so that he can beat Rudolph up publicly. Like, of course he is. And I had realised that before, but it's so funny, I think, if Ludwig really kind of lets you into the process of seeing it happen. This is why Ludwig is such a great character, because he lets the audience in on everything he is doing. I see a magnificent way out of this. By Jupiter, I'll try it. Are you in earnest? And that's just like when the Patagai says, "Are you really in earnest? Are you really resolved to die?" It's very similar, and it's so similar in tone. I wonder if that was intentional. I wonder if Gilbert is trying to relive the glory days of the Mikado by doing the Grand Duke. They really do have quite a lot of parallels. But yeah, this is probably my funniest scene in the whole show. There are just so many good bits in it. Like, just the whole, "Now for my confession and full pardon." Just, again, letting the audience in. It starts with a soliloquy, just like the Patagai. "Now for my confession and full pardon. I don't see the Grand Duke. Hello, what's this? Why, it is the Grand Duke." They told me the duet. They told me the Grand Duke was dancing duets in the marketplace. So, like, they are actually dancing, in the universe of the Grand Duke. It's not that they just kind of go into a trance and the audience is the only person that sees a song. They are actually dancing in the universe of the Grand Duke, which is amazing. It's so self-aware, but in a really funny way. And then there's the whole kind of competition over who's more upset, and like, look at me. Well, I wouldn't be a crybaby. Well, I wouldn't be a crybaby. And then he just gets the idea. I see a magnificent way out of this. He's just so lucky. Ludwig has like the best luck out of like anyone in the gallery. He walks into the situation like expecting like, I might still die. He's like thinking, I could definitely still die, like walking into this situation. And yet he goes with the situation and ends up like with a plan that means he's going to become the Grand Duke. Like, I see a magnificent way out of this. That's one of my favourite lines. It's just so good. And then because Ludwig keeps letting you in, you root with him so much. And then when he's just being really dry with the, "Oh, we must have a devil of a quarrel." Yeah, really to give colour to the thing. I can give you a sound thrashing, say the word, it's no trouble. But the audience are right there with him. He's letting them in. And that just means that we automatically root for him. And that makes him just one of the most likeable, intriguing characters in the canon. He speaks to us. He literally speaks to us so much. Sadly, they have to explain what a statutory duel is for the third time in the show, but actually it seems like Rudolph gets it quite quickly. Perhaps he did kind of already know vaguely what a statutory duel was. And the fact that Ludwig is just able to blag his way through the situation as well, actuated by an overwhelming sense of attachment to your grand ducal person, I unhesitatingly offer myself as the victim of your subject's fury. This is beautiful writing. It's so good. Why do people not like this show? It mixes one up awfully. Yeah, I am hurt. Really hurt by the suggestion. I think cut that or give a guarantee would be equally open to objections. I didn't really think it was needed. I think I cut just that tiny bit of it when I did it, and I probably would do that again, just for the flow. I do sometimes think that even though I usually love Gilbert's kind of lengthy jokes and him taking ages over things, there are a couple of times when I just think that there is something superfluous, and that probably I would cut out to make it funnier. I've given this one a 20 for comedy because I think it is the best one, but I may change my mind if I discover a later one is funnier. Narrative sense, I mean, I hope people manage to catch on to what he's doing. I'm going to give it an 8 and not higher just because I'm aware that it does happen so quickly that maybe people might slightly miss what's going on, but there is narrative in this scene, and I personally think it makes sense, as long as the actors and the director know what the scene's about and just rehearse it a lot. Beauty/poetry, there's some lovely language in here. I'm actually going to give this a 9. There's some really great stuff happening. And character as well, they both come, I'm going to give this another 10. The characters are just leaping off the page in this scene. You can see exactly how Rudolph is, even in the face of his own death. Even when somebody has offered to sacrifice himself so that he could stay alive, he's still trying to find a way to save money. It's just perfect. And then Ludwig, he's such a hero, but he's also so clever, so witty, so funny. And I am hurt, really hurt by the suggestion. He's already just so dry, so dryly witty. And he's constantly involving the audience. I forgot to mention earlier that, and here we see the disadvantages of a neglected education. He's always letting you in. I've said that maybe 20 times now. I'll try not to say it again. Emotional dramatic impact. It is not truly dramatic. I'm going to give it an 8 because it certainly is very dramatic, but it's not really emotional, is it? But that still wins so far. That's getting a 55. So yeah, well done. Scene, I really like you. I think you are a candidate for one of the best scenes in the canon. I don't think this scene beats all of the scenes in the Mikado, but it'll certainly beat some of them. I think it's a really, really great scene, perhaps even top 10 material.
And now that everybody has gone, and we are happily and comfortably married, I want to have a few words with my newborn husband.
Yes, I expect you'll often have a few words with your newborn husband.
Well, what is it? I have been thinking that as you and I have to play our parts for life, it is most essential that we should come to a definite understanding as to how they shall be rendered. Now, I've been considering how I can make the most of the Grand Duchess.
Have you? Well, if you'll take my advice, you'll make a very fine part of it.
Why, that's quite my idea.
I shouldn't make it one of your hoity-toity vixenish farragos.
You think not?
Oh, I'm quite clear about that. I should make her a tender, gentle, submissive, affectionate, but not too affectionate, child wife, timidly anxious to coil herself into her husband's heart, but kept in check by an awestruck reverence for his exalted qualities and his majestic personal appearance.
Oh, that is your idea of a good part?
Yes. A wife who regards her husband's slightest wish as an inflexible law, and who ventures but rarely into his august presence, unless, which would happen seldom, he should summon her to appear before him, a crushed, despairing violet, whose blighted existence would culminate all too soon in a lonely and pathetic death scene. A fine part, my dear.
Yes. There is a good deal to be said for your view of it. Now, there are some actresses whom it would fit like a glove.
I wish I'd married one of them.
But you see, I must consider my temperament. For instance, my temperament would demand some strong scenes of justifiable jealousy.
Oh, there's no difficulty about that. You shall have them.
With a lovely but detested rival,
Oh, I'll provide the rival.
whom I should stab.
Oh, I wouldn't stab her. It's been done to death. I should treat her with a silent and contemptuous disdain, and delicately withdraw from a position which, to one of your sensitive nature, would be absolutely untenable. Dear me, I can see you delicately withdrawing, up centre and off. Splendid, splendid.
Can you?
Yes, it's a fine situation and full of quiet pathos.
So this scene is one that I do love. I've got lots of very happy memories of filming this with Will and Phil, actually, because I performed Julia in 3 different productions, and twice it was Will and once it was Phil. So I've always had a fantastic Ludwig whenever I've been doing this scene. So I have been blessed. But this scene can be slightly problematic. I mean, Will was the one who actually brought it up to me. He doesn't like the lines about venturing rarely into his august presence, because after a whole first act of Ludwig being like a really nice, respectful guy, it suddenly seems like he wants a wife that will be like that. But in actuality, if I can hopefully try and clear this up for Will and like make him feel better about doing the role in the future, or doing this scene in the future, there is an interpretation where I feel that when he's saying, well, I wish I'd married one of them, it's only because he actually wants to be with Lisa, who's still around. So the kind of wife he wants is somebody who'll just kind of worship him from afar and actually never go anywhere near him. And the thing is, he's also being slightly facetious as well. I don't think there's any possible world in which Julia would do what he was saying. So I think he's having a little bit of fun in his new kind of very dark place that he's in now after Lisa has gone, because he is just chosen the Grand Duchy over his one true love. And maybe he's regretting it a little bit. I mean, I don't know. That would be up to the actor and the director. But certainly he is not in a good place mentally. And I do think his humour becomes, like, he becomes much more sarcastic and more dry, I think, as the act goes on. And he's just constantly goading and teasing her. But Julia is totally oblivious to this. And that's, to me, where the humour comes from. The fact that these two characters are having a conversation, but neither is really listening to the other at all. Both of them are just completely in their own worlds. But Ludwig is also doing that thing again where he invites the audience to kind of be there with him. So throughout this scene, there's moments where Ludwig is kind of to the audience like, get a load of this. Like, oh, I've got myself into a situation, haven't I? It's up to the actors, it's up to both Ludwig and Julia, and actually I would say more so Julia, to make sure that that doesn't look problematic. We need to establish, or the actors and the director need to establish, that Ludwig's hatred of Julia is nothing to do with her being a powerful, strong woman. It is just because she is a complete sociopath and she is utterly devoid of any kind of empathy and is just totally self-obsessed. And that is really Julia's job, to make Ludwig look better than he would be if, you know, she was actually somebody to be respected. And that is not me saying that Julia is a totally unredeemable person. I think Julia is fabulous, and I think we can all learn a lot from Julia, actually. As I say, she's never kind of mean. Yeah, she did take Lisa away from Ludwig, but I mean, it kind of was her right. Like, that's the thing. It is her part. And and if she is perfectly willing to live with the consequences of doing something like that, then fine. I mean, if that's the way she wants to live her life, I mean, that's okay, because she clearly doesn't really feel any guilt about it. And yeah, fine. I mean, I wouldn't want to be friends with a person like that, but I mean, it's It is inspiring. It's like how I find watching my cats inspiring. The fact that my cats, like, they will not go anywhere that they don't want to go. I mean, apart from, like, if they need to go to the vet and I'll carry them. But I mean, if I go like, oh, come on, kitty, come on. I'm like, I feed you. I spend thousands of pounds a year on keeping you safe. And I go, kitty, come on. She'll just look at me like, no. She won't say no. That really would be something. But, you know, they just go, no. And the fact that they don't have any sense of, like, guilt or shame or worry about what we might think of them. Like, one of my favourite examples is when my cat Daenerys is waiting by the back door and it's pouring with rain. This has happened several times. She's been waiting by the back door and it's pouring with rain. I'm like, Daenerys, I really don't think you want to go out. I'll open the door for her and I'll just see her just kind of look and think about it and then just like, no, and just walk away. But I mean, obviously cats can't talk, but there's never any sense of like, oh, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have called you away from what you were doing to open the door. It's just like, no. Just don't care. And there's something that I think that people like me who were like conditioned to please people, and like any time in my life where I did act selfishly is something that like I really struggle with. Like I really struggle with some of the decisions I've made in my life, which I do consider to be quite selfish. Like they haunt me. And so people like me need to learn to be a bit more selfish in a way, because I'm just constantly trying to keep everyone else around me happy. And so playing Julia to me is such catharsis because I can finally be like that person without having to worry about what people think of me. One thing that struck me in reading this scene, which hadn't really struck me before, is the way that Ludwig should deliver those lines about how she should be this crushed, despairing Violet. Because often and funnily enough, when I've been playing Julia, I've been so self-obsessed and so focused on what I'm doing that I've never really listened to what Will's been doing in the scenes with me. So actually I need to watch that and see what he does, because I'm just not listening, because that's kind of part of, I mean, I'm listening as much as an actor needs to listen, but I'm very much focused on my own performance. Julia's got these kinds of lines where you can't really focus on Ludwig's interjections because your line is like a long line with those in the middle, so you have to just focus on saying your own line. But now that I'm actually focusing on saying Ludwig's lines as well, I'm noticing that like I've seen a lot of people kind of just read these out kind of belligerently and angrily, whereas it's quite fun to imagine that Ludwig is literally trying to get Julia to play the part in this way. As I say, not because he thinks that she actually will, like ultimately, but because he is getting pleasure of just kind of messing her about as much as he can. And like, oh, I wouldn't do that. It's been done to death, my dear. You're so good at that. You're so good at being a crushed, despairing Violet. And, you know, and she's playing to her ego. Oh, you're saying so. I'd be good at that, wouldn't you? Know, it's very good. So, but is this scene like as good as the one before it? No. I mean, I give it a solid 16 for comedy. I do think it's really funny. Is it anything to do with the narrative? Not really. I'm going to give it a 6 for narrative. I'm not going to give it a 5, but I'm going to give it a 6 because at least it like, no, I know I am giving it a 5. It doesn't impede the narrative, but it doesn't really give us anything. It's more of a showpiece for Julia. Beauty, poetry. I do quite like Ludwig's speech. I am going to give that an 8. Character. I don't think Ludwig is really showing his true self here, so I'm gonna give this an 8. I would have given it higher because Julia's so wonderful in this scene, but Ludwig isn't really a big feature part in this scene. Emotional / dramatic impact. Again, I think Ludwig's repressing a lot of what he feels. I'm not really getting a lot of strong, genuine emotion from this scene, so I'm going to give that a 7 because certainly they're being very dramatic, and that gives it a 44 out of 60.
Is this court mourning or a fancy ball?
Well, it's a delicate combination of both effects. It is intended to express inconsolable grief for the decease of the late Duke and ebullient joy at the accession of his successor. I am the successor. Permit me to present to you my Grand Duchess. Your Grand Duchess?
Old frump.
A recent creation, probably. We were married only half an hour ago.
Exactly. I thought she seemed new to the position.
Ma'am, I don't know who you are, but I flatter myself that I can do justice to any part at the shortest notice.
My dear, you are doing admirably, and you'll improve with practice. It's so difficult to be a lady when one isn't born to it.
Am I to chances? Am I not to be allowed to pull her to pieces?
No, it isn't Greek. Be a violet, I beg. And now, tell me about this distressing circumstance. How did the Grand Duke die?
He perished nobly. In a statutory duel.
In a statutory duel? But that's only a civil death.
And the act expires tonight, and then he will come to life again.
Well, no. Anxious to inaugurate my reign by conferring some inestimable boon on my people, I signalise this occasion by reviving the law for another 100 years.
For another 100 years? Am I to understand that you, having taken upon yourself all Rudolph's responsibilities, will occupy the Grand Ducal throne for the ensuing century?
If I should live so long.
Then set the merry joy bells ringing. Let festive epithalamia resound through these ancient halls. Cut the satisfying sandwich, broach the exhilarating masala, and let us rejoice today if we never rejoice again.
But I don't think I understand. We have already rejoiced a good deal.
Happy man! You little wreck of the extent of the good things you are in for. When you killed Rudolph, you adopted all his overwhelming responsibilities. Know then that I, Caroline von Krakenfeld, am the most overwhelming of them all.
But stop. I've just been married to somebody else.
Yes, ma'am, to somebody else, ma'am. Do you understand, ma'am? To somebody else.
Do keep this young woman quiet. She fidgets me.
Fidgets you?
Be a violet. A crushed, despairing violet. Do you suppose I intend to give up this magnificent part without a struggle? My good girl, she has the law on her side. Let us both bear this calamity with resignation. If you must struggle, go away and struggle in the seclusion of your chamber.
Another quick note here before I get into this scene. I did, for some reason, just forget to say the Baroness's line, "Oh, Your Majesty." I just flat out forgot to say it. It's really weird. I guess there's so much dialogue in this and so much is sometimes cut that it didn't strike me that I'd missed that line. But yeah, I'll do it for you now. "Your Majesty." That's what it would have been. So I remember that when Emma Moretti was cast as the Baroness in The Grand Duke, she didn't know the part extremely well. She'd actually played Lisa when I directed it up in St Andrews, and she hadn't done it since then. So it's been a good 15 years or so since she'd done it. And I was saying to her, you know what? Like, Julia has more funny lines than the Baroness, but the Baroness probably has like the most cutting line, like the most fun line to say in the whole show, which is, "My dear, you're doing admirably, and you'll improve the practice. It's just so difficult being a lady when one isn't born to it." It's so good. It's very much the same energy of the, "Listen to me, dear. Oh, don't be foolish, dear. You couldn't play it, darling. It's a leading business, pet, and Gilbert is a Brett. So don't be mulish, dear. Although I say it, darling, it's not your line, my pet. I play that part, you pet." She's so polite, the Baroness, in this scene. And this is why I'm always saying to people, like, anger makes you less powerful. So anger is something to do if you want to show that your character is vulnerable. But if you want to show that your character is strong, like, just be calm. Because actually the Baroness delivering all her lines, like, "Do keep this young woman quiet, she fidgets me." But if it's just like, "Do keep this young woman quiet, she fidgets me," it's less powerful. Or like, "It's so difficult being a lady when one isn't born to it." When people just deliver those lines angrily, I'm like, I feel nothing. I get nothing from that. But you do because it's not reality. In reality, people pretend to be nice to one another, and people would never be kind of openly rude to a person like that. So the trick is, oh no, darling, you're doing so well. It's just very difficult because you weren't born to it, you know. And that is so much more reflective of the horrible way in which people speak to each other in the industry. I remember there was this guy who I was acting with, who I was on a tour with, and like, he was fine. I don't think he was like amazing. He was all right. And I hope he's watching this. And I remember, this was in the days when I drank a lot, so I probably was really annoying, to be fair. However, like, I was in the middle of this really like misogynistic group of people, and I was having a terrible time. So that was not helping me in any way. But I remember having a conversation with this guy where we were talking about like what we wanted to do kind of with our craft, like how good we wanted to be, like where we saw ourselves. And I said something along the lines of, I don't mind about being famous or about making a lot of money. My goal is just that I want to be spectacular at what I do. I just want to know that I can be spectacular. And I remember this, like, even though I was really drunk at the time, I remember it so clearly, his response. He went to, and this, he wasn't older than me. He was maybe 1 year older than me. He'd not had loads more experience than me. We'd both been in the company for actually pretty much exactly the same amount of time. And he turned to me and said, Rachel, you will never be spectacular. And it was in the tone of somebody who was like trying to save me trouble down the line, trying to save me trouble and pain down the line. But actually, like, that was like pretty much the worst thing anyone's ever said to me. Can you imagine saying that to somebody? I had a dancing teacher as well, who, when I said something along the lines of, oh, I really want to be in Cats, when I'm older, because I just liked Cats at the time, like the musical Cats. And she said to me, Rachel, I'm going to tell you this right now. You will never be in that show. I was like, why do people do this? It's so bad. It's like, why do you think you are like saving me from pain? Like, all you're doing is just making me feel terrible in that moment. And the thing is, you could argue that actually maybe what he did was a good thing because it kind of made me angry enough to realise that no, I'm going to be spectacular just to spite him. But, you know, in actuality, it just made me really, really upset to know that somebody cared enough about letting me know that they'd actually say that to my face. I would never dream of saying that, anything like that, to a person's face, especially not a professional. Anyone who is a professional, if I don't really like what they do, I just stay very quiet about it, or I'm very polite, or I'll make sure to kind of focus on all the good things that they do, you know, unless they've been mean to me, and then I'll totally talk about them behind their back and how bad they are. Generally, even people I don't like very much, I can still really respect them as actors and performers, so that's actually very rare for me that I'll be doing that anyway. But when I see people like performing these roles like very kind of angrily and like get you, I just think you've clearly never been in an actual acting company. I know the Baroness isn't an actor, but she kind of is in the context of this show. You have clearly never been spoken to like I've been spoken to, because that's not the way that people say horrible things. People say horrible things with this horrible, sweet tone of voice. And the number of times in my life, like all through my 20s, having people talk to me like that. Rachel, you have to understand that this just isn't your world. The way you behave, like, people shouldn't behave like that. Rachel, you sing a lot. You burst into song a lot, and that was probably the reason that you didn't get elected onto the committee this year. And like, Rachel, I just want to be the one to tell you that people actually find you really annoying. These are all things that people said to me all through my 20s. And so I've had a lot of experience with that. And that's how I'm able to play Julia so well, because I know how that feels. I know what it's like to have people talk to you like that. Then, as Julia, you also get the Baroness speaking back to you in that way, as well as getting to talk to Lisa that way. So it's like instant, well, not instant, like a day later, but it's pretty instant karma. And you get to see Julia in a truly vulnerable state after being completely impervious throughout the entire first act. And so that is very fun as an actor to do. And for that, I'm actually going to give this scene like a really high emotional dramatic impact. I'm going to give it a 9. I don't think I can give it a 10 because it just doesn't match up to some of the dramatic moments in these other operas. But then, to be fair, a lot of those occur in song as well. When I think of all the really dramatic moments in the operas, very few of them actually occur in the dialogue. They're mostly in the music because, you know, these are meant to be comic operas. And character, this is just incredible. Everyone is so good. And what's actually great about this is that even though Ludwig is in the scene, I do kind of consider this scene to be mainly like a little spar between Julia and the Baroness, and Ludwig is just explaining stuff in the middle of it, which is exposition, and stuff is getting across, and it's immediately understandable. As soon as the Baroness says, "Let the marriage jawbones ringing," you know, people are like, what? But then they're slowly getting throughout that speech, oh no, I see what's going on here. So I think this is great for narrative. I'm going to give it a 9. Beauty, poetry, I mean, cut the satisfying sandwich. That gets a 9 for me. Character, I'm going to give it a 9 as well, because I don't think that Ludwig really shows off who he is like amazingly in this scene, but you do get some really funny interjections from him. Be a violet, a crushed sparing violet. That's very funny. And that only really occurred to me that he would play it like that when I did it. Again, I just don't really tend to notice Ludwig when I'm in the zone as Julia, which is not usual practice. Usually I'd say as an actor, you must be aware of what everyone else is doing on stage around you. But as Julia, it's very hard to do that because it's in your character to really focus on yourself. So it does make a difference. It makes a difference, doesn't it? What am I going to give this for comedy? I do think it's pretty funny, but it's funny because of how shocking it is. I think I'm also going to give this scene a 16.
It's no use. I can't wait any longer. At any risk, I must gratify my urgent desire to know what is going on. Why, what's that? Surely I see a wedding procession winding down the hill, dressed in my Troilus and Cressida costumes. That's Ludwig's doing. I see how it is. He found the time hang heavy on his hands and is amusing himself by getting married to Lisa. Oh no, it can't be Lisa, for here she is.
I really can't stand seeing my Ludwig married twice in one day to somebody else.
Lisa! Come here. Don't be a little fool. I want you. Why? What's the matter with the little donkey? One would think she saw a ghost. But if he's not marrying Lisa, whom is he marrying? I see it all. The scoundrel. He had to adopt all my responsibilities, and he's shabbily taken advantage of the situation to marry the girl I'm engaged to. But it can't be Julia, for here she is.
I've made up my mind. I won't stand it. I've sent in my notice at once.
Julia! Oh, what a relief. Then you've not married Ludwig? You are still true to me? Don't run away. Listen to me. Are you all crazy?
What bedürft me, Spectre?
Oh, ain't his eyes sepulchral? And oh, ain't his voice hollow? What are you doing out of your tomb at this time of day? Apparition? I do wish I could make you girls understand that I'm only technically dead, and that physically I'm as much alive as I ever was in my life. Oh, but it's an awful thing to be haunted by a technical bogie. You won't be haunted much longer. The law must be on its last legs, and in a few hours I shall come to life again, resume all my social and civil functions, and claim my darling as my blushing bride.
Oh, then you haven't heard.
My love, I've heard nothing. How could I? There are no daily papers where I come from.
Why, Ludwig challenged Rudolph and won, and now he's Grand Duke, and he's revived the law for another century.
What? You're not serious. You're only joking.
My good sir, I am a light-hearted girl, but I don't chaff bogies.
Well, that's the meanest dodge I ever heard of.
Shabby trick, I call it.
But you don't mean to say that you're going to cry off?
I really can't afford to wait until your time is up. You know, I've always set my face against long engagements.
Then defy the law and marry me now. We will fly to your native country, and I'll play broken English in London as you play broken German here.
No, these legal technicalities cannot be denied. Situated as you are, you have no power to make me your wife. At best, you could only make me your widow.
Then be my widow. My little dainty, winning, winsome widow.
Now what would be the good of that? Are you goose? I should marry again within a month.
This is also a scene that, as someone who's played Julia a lot, it's very fun. It hadn't really struck me before that this scene could really be used to make Ernest a lot more sympathetic and actually have Julia warm towards him a bit. Like, certainly when she realises that, oh wait, you don't know what's happened. And actually maybe that's when it strikes her as well. She's like, oh wait, now this means you can't come to life again. And I think this is the first point where Julia feels empathy for another person. And that can't be understated, that moment. And it does seem that her experience has taught her something. Like, it has humbled her. It's got her to kind of look towards other people. And it means that where that first scene where it's her and Ernest, it was all about her. And she never even looked at him, or maybe she did, up to the director and actor, but still, like, it's not focused on him whatsoever. But in this scene, it's very much about him and his problem. But in order to get to that stage, they have to go through like a section where she's still acting, oh, what would you with me, Spectre? But then it kind of gets serious and it gets real. But this scene is also absolutely full of comedy. I love the two things about bogies. It's an awful thing to be haunted by a technical bogie. Because I am a light-hearted girl, but I don't chaff bogies. Also, Julia is not a light-hearted girl. She's so serious. And that's what's really funny. I wouldn't say this is quite as like laugh-out-loud funny as the others. That there is a ton of comic potential in this scene that isn't actually in the words, but the fact that everyone is screaming, I think, does mean that it is the only one that gets this dramatic mark of 10. Because even though it's not necessarily emotional, but then I think from what I was saying before about Julia and Ernest's relationship turning a corner, maybe it is kind of emotional. So this scene I actually really like as a scene for character. You get to see that these characters have transformed a little bit. I'm definitely going to give that a 9 for character. Yeah, really very good. Beauty poetry, though, I don't think it deserves quite as high a mark as that. I'm going to give it a 7. And narrative / sense, this is somewhat... It is good in that it brings Ernest back and we're reminded that he exists. So I appreciate the fact that we're reminded that Ernest exists. But the narrative on the whole is somewhat on pause. I mean, the narrative does start to get a bit loosey-goosey here anyway. But I am only going to give that, again, a 7. Comedy, I mean, I've given the last couple 16s. I think this is maybe a hair funnier. It's got like a bit more slapstickness going on. As I say, it's more potential than actual lines, but I do think it deserves a 17. So overall, this scene gets a 50 out of 60, which that's a really, really great mark. Come here, don't be a little fool. I want you. Ernest is so silly. His lines are so silly. I do wish I could make you girls understand that I'm only technically dead. It's really, really very good. And then the fascination that Julia has over, ooh, I could be a widow, a kind of dark widow, you know, she gets to play the part of a woman that's being haunted by this old lover of hers that is now dead. Like, perfect, absolutely perfect for her. So much better than the Grand Duchess. Like, she is sitting pretty, Julia. Just before I start the next few videos, I would like to say something important about my French accent. I have scraped a German accent, mostly because I've been thinking about playing the part of Julia for about 20 years. So I've kind of got that part down. So even if the German accent itself isn't amazingly German or like accurate in any way, although I think it has got better with each successive performance I've done, I'm relatively good at a German accent. I've worked in Germany for 12 years, so I've been around a lot of German accents from all over the country. So I do somewhat understand how to speak in a German accent. However, French, yeah, I'm not so good at the French. And the only way I seem to be able to do a French accent is if I do this with my hands. And even then, the first scene is pretty good because everyone speaks in a French accent, but definitely a few scenes later, you will notice that there are some words that I just do not know how to say a French accent in at all. And especially when I've got a scene where Julia's speaking as well, and then I've got the prince and the princess speaking, I am completely forgetting who is in which voice, and I'm getting really messed up. So please do forgive me for my lack of ability to really distinguish between each character in the following few scenes. But I am by no means perfect, and I am not good at a French accent. I never have been, and please do not take this as me trying to make fun of French people. I'm only making fun of their accent. And that is a joke that is okay to use because the French invaded us in 1066 and subsequently in 1216. And the last successful invasion of this country by France was, I believe, in 1326 with Edward II, but that's another story. Anyway, I have no qualms about making fun of a French accent because the French are not a systematically oppressed race or culture, and I would very, very much welcome a French person making fun of my accent. I would literally find that hilarious, so please do that.
Well, my dear, here I are at last, just in time to compel Duke Rodolphe to fulfill the terms of his marriage contract. Another hour and we should have been too late.
Yes, Papa, and if you hadn't fortunately discovered a means of making an income by honest industry, we should never have got here at all.
Very true. Confined for the last 2 years within the precincts of my palace by an obdurate bootmaker who held a warrant for my arrest, I devoted my enforced leisure to a study of the doctrine of chances, merely with the view of ascertaining whether there was the remotest chance of my ever going out for a walk again. And this led to the discovery of a singularly fascinating little round game which I have called roulette, and in which, in one sitting, I won no less than 5,000 francs. My first act was to pay my bootmaker, my second to engage a good, useful working set of second-hand nobles, and my third to hurry you off to Pfennig as fast as a train de luxe could carry us.
Yes, and it's a pretty job lot of second-hand nobles you scrape together.
Pretty, you think? Humph, I don't know. I should say tolol, my love, only tolol. They are not only satisfactory, there is a certain air of unreality about them. They are not convincing.
But my good friend, what can you expect for 18 pounds a day?
Now, take this pair, for instance. What's the deuce do you call him? Him? Oh, he is a swell. He is the Duke of Riviere. Oh, he's a duke, is he? Well, that's no reason why he should look so confoundedly haughty. Be affable, sir. And now who's this with his moustache coming off? Why, you're Viscount Mitton, ain't you? Blessed if I know. It's right here. Yes. Viscount Minton. Then why don't you say so? All you slip up. You ain't carrying sandwich boats now. Now run send for all your peers. When His Highness arrives, don't stand like steaks. but appear to take an intelligent and sympathetic interest in what is going on. You needn't say anything, but let your gestures be in accordance with the spirit of the conversation. Now, take word from me. Affability, submission, surprise, shame, grief, joy. That's better. You can do it if you like.
But Papa, where in the world is the court? There is positively no one here to receive us. I can't have feelings that Rudolph wants to get out of it because I'm poor. He's a miserly little wretch, that's what he is.
Well, I shouldn't go so far as to say that. I should rather describe him as an enthusiastic collector of coins, of the realm. It's a pretty hobby. I've often thought I should like to collect some coins myself.
I'm sure there's someone behind its curtain. I saw it move.
Then no doubt they are coming. Now mind your peers. Haughty affability combined with a sense of what is due to your exalted rank, so I'll find you half a franc each upon my soul I will.
This scene is absolutely mad, isn't it? It is just so different to any other scene in any other opera. It's just absolutely bonkers. I actually did forget to include some of the extra dialogue in this scene. I'm not going to bother mentioning two of them because I don't really find them that interesting, but there's one which is pretty good, so I'm just going to do that little section for you now. It's just addressing like one of the other nobles. So the prince speaks, then the costumier, then the prince again.
Now, here's a nobleman's coat all in holes. What the careless chap you are! Why don't you take care of the clothes? These cost money, these two. Do you think I stole them? It's not the poor devil's fault. It's yours. I don't wish you to end our house of peers, but you might at least mend them.
I think that's quite silly. I just like this goat all in holes. Please tell me if you think my French accent is offensive. I don't think it's offensive because I think that it's not problematic to make fun of the French accent. But I mean, maybe the extent to which I did it is a bit silly. But it is mostly out of incompetence rather than actually deliberately trying to make fun. If I could do a perfect French accent here, I would do that. There's one line that me and Will love in particular, and that's is a miserly little head, that's what he is. It was the way that Joanna said it when she played the Princess of Monte Carlo in our Baron's Court production, but that one always had us in stitches. I mean, this scene, honestly, the material itself, like, isn't really terribly funny, but when it's done with those ridiculous accents and with a ton of energy, and when the nobles are just really flat, and the prince and princess are really energetic to make up for it, and the costumier is just bonkers. It's such a good, fun scene. And the fact that we've not met these people yet, and they've got the unenviable job of having to come on at the 11th hour and suddenly make us like interested in who they are and what they're doing, and that is a tall order. But I do think that as long as you get really good actors to do this, I think it's totally possible. I mean, when I did it recently with the Grosvenor Light Opera Company, the Prince and Princess and the Herald especially, they were so funny, and they always got the loudest applause every night. This scene was cracking. The next two scenes were so good. There's just also loads of potential for little bits you can put in here and there, because when we did it in Baron's Court, Will was playing Ludovic. He also played Viscount Mentone, and he had like a little back and forth with the costume. He was also holding a puppet because we only had 5 supernumeraries, so the puppet was the 6th supernumerary. It was a sheep puppet. And yeah, that was very funny. So I think that this is an opportunity for business, this scene, but maybe in the actual, when you read the actual material, just word for word, it doesn't seem like very funny in itself. It's odd because when you actually see this on stage, every line is hilarious. But I guess it depends on the actor. So it's not director proof, this scene, or actor proof. I love the line where the prince says, "They are not wholly satisfactory. There was a certain air of unreality about them. They are not convincing." And to me, that is really symptomatic of just this show in general, and how all these people are kind of playing a part, including him. And how it's funny that we have like actors within a play about actors, and it's just, there are so many levels and like things in this opera that are just absolutely nuts. It's so good. I'm going to give this a 16 for comedy, but knowing that it could be a 20 if it was the right people. Narrative sense, I do think he's getting across a lot of information here, but there's also maybe some stuff that's a bit distracting, so I'll give it a 7. Beauty, poetry, I do really like it. There's a lot of lovely speeches in there. I think it's kind of hard to see the beauty when you're kind of focusing on doing an accent, but I'm also going to give that a 7. And character, I mean, this is a great vehicle for the characters of the prince and the princess and the costumier, so I'm going to give that an 8. Emotional dramatic impact, though, I'm only going to give that a 6. I don't really think there's anything in the scene that really kind of makes it pop. In fact, I'm only going to give that a 5. I don't really think the princess is ever really truly upset in this scene. She does get a little bit upset later, but not now. But yeah, all in all, I do have some amazing memories of this scene, but I do think that on the page, it's maybe not as amazing as it is in my mind.
There, what do you think of that? That's our official ceremonial for the reception of visitors of the very highest distinction.
It's very quaint, very curious indeed. Prettily footed too, prettily footed.
Would you like to see how we say goodbye to visitors of distinction? That ceremony is also performed with the foot.
Really, is this done? But perhaps you have not completely grasped the situation.
Not altogether.
Then I give you a little verre. I am the father of the Princess of Monte Carlo. Doesn't that convey any idea to the Grand Ducal mind?
Nothing definite.
Very odd. And never mind, try again. This is the daughter of the Prince of Monte Carlo. Do you take?
No, not yet. Go on, don't give it up. I dare say it will come presently.
Never mind, try again. 20 years ago, little doddle doddle, 2 little doddle doddles, happy fathers, hers and yours, proud mother, yours and hers. Ha! Now you take? I see you do, I see you do.
Nothing is more annoying than to find you are not equal to the intellectual pressure of the conversation. I wish you'd say something intelligible.
You didn't expect me?
No. No. I grasp that. Thank you very much. No, I did not expect you.
I thought not. But ha! At last I have escaped from my enforced constraint. No, you misunderstand me. I mean, I've paid my debts. And how do you think I did it? Through the medium of roulette.
Roulette? Now you're getting obscure again. The lucid interval has expired.
I'll explain. It's an invention of my own. The simplest thing in the world, and what is remarkable, it comes just in time to supply a distinct and long-felt want. I'll tell you all about it.
Very little is funnier to me in my life than the bit where the prince is trying to explain to Ludwig what the situation is. It's the fact that Ludwig isn't even like trying to ask questions. He's just like, no, nothing definite. No, please try again. Like, I'll get it. and the little doddle. Nothing is more annoying than to feel you are not equal to the intellectual pressure of the conversation. And that joke was used before. Don Owl used it in the Gondoliers. But, I'm happy it was used again because it is a good joke. And again, like, Ludwig is he is trying. He is using every opportunity to bring the audience in and, like, experience, like, just how confused he is. I think for me, the comedy in this scene really comes from just how confused Ludwig must be. Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's imagining if this person, like did just come in and say that. So, okay, I'm going to tell you about one of the funniest things that has ever happened to me in my life that has directly come from confusion over something. So, I was in China, I can't remember where, but it was in a place where nobody spoke any English at all. Like, it was just completely impossible to communicate using words. Everything had to be demonstrated. We knew like a tiny bit of Chinese, but it's very hard to use to learn Chinese. And when you try and use it, they just look at you like, what on earth are you saying? So you learn words because you're probably saying them like a microtone out of the intonation they should be, like people don't understand you. And we were in this like little food market after a show. So we were just in this little street food place. And we walked up to this lady who had like a big wok and she was doing like rice or noodles. I can't remember. I think it was rice. And this man had literally just got some food off her. And it was just like a stir fry with egg in it. And my friend Mark, he really wanted that. He loves egg and he really wanted that. So he pointed to that and was like that. And I think he even said like sugar, which means like that. Or something like that. And then the lady seemed to understand and, you know, she did her cooking. And then she like handed it to Mark and it had a lid on it. We got to the table. So I got something different. We got to the table. He opened it up and it had no egg in it. And so he walked back to the lady and saw that there were some eggs like underneath the counter. And he kind of pointed to an egg and I was like, this, in there, this. And she went, oh, yeah, and it's okay, she understands. So then she fried it up and she was like, I'll bring it over. So he sat down and then she brought it over to him again. And he opened it up and nothing had changed. And so he then walked back over and he saw there was a tiny bit of egg just like on like the surface of her stove. And he picked up that tiny bit of egg and he's like, no, I want this in here, like this, in there. And again, she went, oh, like, okay, yeah. And then, again, she cooked it. She brought it over. And when he got it again, all that had changed was that it was the same. It had just been fried again. But it just had that one tiny bit of egg that he picked up and given to her. And after that, he was like, I give up. I give up. I'm never going to get the egg. But what made me laugh so much about that situation was the fact that in her mind, like, she must have been so confused. Because she must have thought these crazy Westerners just want me to recook this again to put that one tiny bit of egg in. I just love confusion. Confusion makes me so happy. Like that kind of like mild misunderstanding that doesn't really have any stakes or consequences. It's just like a really funny misunderstanding. And that is also kind of what I see in this situation with Ludwig is just like, I have no idea. Because if it was Rudolph, he'd know instantly what this is about. I'm the Prince of Monte Carlo. Oh yes, because I'm engaged to your daughter. That's what it is. But Ludwig's just like, what? So it's imagining how confused Ludwig must be that makes me love this scene. And there's not really too much else in it. That is mostly what the joke is. And then he goes in to talk about roulette for a little bit. You got that joke, at last I've escaped from my enforced restraints. Oh my god. Yeah, so that, but I'm going to give this a 17 purely for the power of how funny that section of sheer confusion is. And also, would you like to see how we say goodbye to visitors of distinction? That ceremony is also performed with the foot. It's just so charming. I love it. Narrative sense. We start to get somewhere, then we deviate to roulette. So I'm actually going to give this scene a 6. I think that even though I'm very happy the roulette song is still in, I can see why it was cut for narrative purposes. even though I would never cut it myself. But yeah, the scene narratively is not terribly good. Beauty poetry, I'm going to give a 7. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. The beauty poetry is actually done a little bit better than I thought it would. It's really nicely, very nicely written. Character, I don't really know if there's like too much going on in this scene. I think I'm just going to give character a 6. Well, no, maybe a 7, because we do get to reiterate just how eccentric the prince and princess are. So for that, I'll bump it up to a 7. Emotional dramatic impact, there's not really any at all in this scene. Again, I'm going to give it a 5. I don't think it's like anti-emotion, but it's certainly not the most emotional scene in the show by a long way. But that one joke.
Capital game. Haven't a penny left. Pretty toy, isn't it? Have another turn. Thanks, no. I should only be robbing you.
Do, dearest, it's such fun.
Why, forward, little hussy, how dare you? You mustn't do that, my dear. Never in the presence of the Grand Duchess, I beg.
Oh, Papa, it's got a Grand Duchess.
A Grand Duchess? My good girl, I've got 3 Grand Duchesses.
3 Grand Duchesses. But let us understand each other. Am I not addressing the Grand Duke Rudolph?
Not at all. You're addressing another sort of Grand Duke altogether.
This comes of not asking the way. We've mistaken the turning and gone into the wrong Grand Duchy. But let us know where we are. Who the deuce is this gentleman? He's the gentleman I married yesterday.
He's the gentleman I married this morning.
He's the gentleman I married this afternoon. There, I'm sure. Papa, let's go away. This is not a respectable court.
All these Grand Dukes have their little fancies, my love. This potentate appears to be collecting wives. It's a pretty hobby. I should like to collect a few myself. This is a charming specimen. An antique, I should say, of the early Merovingian period, if I'm not mistaken. And here's another. A Scotch lady, I think. And a little one thrown in. 2 half curtains and a make weight. Have you such a thing as a catalogue of the museum?
But this is getting serious. If this is not Rudolph, the question is, where in the world is he?
No, the question is, where out of the world is he? And that's a very curious question too.
What do you mean?
The Grand Duke Rudolph died yesterday.
What?
Quite suddenly. Of a cardiac affection.
Of a cardiac affection?
Yes, a pack of cardiac affection. He fought a statutory duel with me and lost, and I took over all his engagements, including this imperfectly preserved old lady to whom he has been engaged for the last 3 weeks.
3 weeks? But I have been engaged to him for the last 20 years.
20 years? It's all right, my lad. They can't get over that. It's yours. Take him and hold him as tight as you can.
My own.
Here's another. The 4th in 24 hours. Would anyone else like to marry me? You, Mom, or you, anybody? I'm getting used to it.
But let me tell you, vile impudent little hussy. Oh, here's another. Well, ladies, I'm very sorry for you all. But, you see, I've a prior claim. Come, there we go. There's not a moment to be lost.
So I can definitely see why some of this extra dialogue is cut, and I think I actually made it actively worse by including it, because it meant we didn't get that really lovely line that I find very funny, which is, "Oh, but Papa, I can't permit Rudolph to keep a museum." And then Ludwig says, "Get along with you, I'm not Rudolph." For some reason, I do find that really funny. So I don't really like too much of the extra dialogue here. The only thing I really do like is when Ludwig is kind of pondering the philosophical question of what happens after death. So the question is, where out of the world is he? And that is a very interesting question. Let's all think about that for a moment. I do really like this. I think it's impressive how Gilbert manages to get all of this across. There's so many people talking. In fact, maybe even too many people, which is why he cut out that bit of, "I married him, yesterday. I married him this morning. I married him this afternoon." So I can see why that was cut out. But, it was interesting to see what it was like to include it, even just for this reading of the dialogue. But yeah, I do think this one maybe needs a little bit of slimming down just to get the flow of it a bit more, because it seems like it keeps going off track slightly and then finding its way back on track again, and that maybe if the story was just focused on it would be a bit cleaner. And yet again, Ludwig addresses his audience. Here's another, the 4th in 24 hours. Would anyone else like to marry me? You, Mum, or you? Anybody? I'm getting used to it. That's a great line. It does show us how Ludwig has just given up and has gone from being the total instigator and catalyst to all of the plot changes. He is the one actively driving the plot, but he ends up in this act as just being a person who is surrounded by chaos and who starts off the act being, yes, I'm the Grand Duke, even though I've lost Lisa, I'm the Grand Duke, but then just over the course of the act he's like, oh, yeah, this probably isn't worth it. And then by this point, he is just so defeated, but in a way that's very funny, because everyone else on stage, like the prince and the princess, have so much energy that it doesn't really matter if Ludwig is slightly deflated at this point, because all of his lines are so sarcastic and cutting, and a lot of them are like asides to the audience, which I find really, really funny. And the cardiac affection. I mean, come on. It's a very funny joke. And Julia being a Scotch lady when she's not Scotch, she's German. That's a second Scottish joke in this show. There's also the slight social commentary of our capitalist society, in the sense that, yeah, well, of course, we all know that in roulette the house always wins, but, maybe this roulette song is also an allegory for our current capitalist society. I always end up talking about capitalism in these videos, but I also don't think that Gilbert liked capitalism that much. I really feel like Gilbert probably was a socialist. And yeah, you can argue with me in the comments if you like. I'd be interested to know if you agree. So is this scene as funny as the ones before? I actually really don't think it is. I'm going to give this a... What shall I give it? I'm going to give it a 13 for comedy. I do think there are some funny moments in it, but it's certainly not as good as previous scenes. Narrative sense, so I'm going to give, again, a 7. I think there is stuff going on and the plot is progressing, but again, we keep being diverted, and that is why this one may be a candidate for some cuts. Beauty poetry as well. I don't really find there's much flow with this dialogue. I feel like it's quite choppy and changey, so I'm actually going to give this one a 5. It's interesting how there seemed to be quite a dramatic downturn in the quality of the dialogue for this scene. Character, again, it's more narrative than it is character, but I do like the prince calling back to the joke he made earlier about the coins. Yeah, so I don't think it's bad for character. I'm still going to give it a 6, but it's more just that there's so much talk, so much going on, so many different people talking, that I don't think it really gives you any kind of clear insight into anyone's mind at this current moment. Emotional dramatic impact. I'm going to give it a 6 because I do... Actually, I might even give it a 7 because I appreciate that there's just lots of chaos going on, and there's just lots of people kind of having loads of different opinions at once. So I think the pure chaos of that does make it quite dramatic. So this scene is the second worst so far, but it still has its charm very much.
My good sir, it's no use your saying that I can't revive the law in the face of the fact that I have revived it. You didn't revive it. You couldn't revive it. You are an impostor, sir. A twopenny rogue, sir. You never were, and in all human probability never will be, Grand Duke or Fennig anything. What? Never, never, never. Oh, my internal economy. That's absurd. I fought the Grand Duke. He drew a king, and I drew an ace. He perished in inconceivable agonies on the spot. Now, as that's settled, we'll go on with the wedding. It isn't settled. You can't. Oh, tell him I can't. Well, the fact is, there's been a little mistake here. On reference to the act that regulates statutory duels, I find it is expressly laid down that the ace shall count invariably as lowest. As lowest? As lowest. So we are the goest. Oh, what is the matter with me inside here?
Well, Julia, it seems that the law hasn't been revived, and as consequently I shall come to life in about 3 minutes. Very well. But will you promise to give me some strong scenes of justifiable jealousy? Justifiable jealousy. My love, I couldn't do it.
Then I won't play.
Well, I'll do my best. Am I to understand that all this time I've been a dead man without knowing it? And that I married a dead man without knowing it?
And that I was on the point of marrying a dead man without knowing it. Oh, my love, what a narrow escape I have had.
Oh, you are the Princess of Monte Carlo. And you've turned up just in time. Well, you're an attractive little girl, you know, but you're as poor as a rat.
Pardon me, they your mistake accept a dowry with a father's blessing.
What do you call this?
It's my little wheel of fortune. I'll tell you all about it.
That's all very well. But what is to become of me if you're a dead man?
Dong! 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 But I'm not. Time's up. The act's expired. I've come to life. The parson is still in attendance. And we'll all be married directly.
I delivered that last line really weirdly because that's never how I've directed it. I've always just gone, time's up! The parson's in attendance and we'll all be married directly! Hurrah! That's always how I've done it, so I don't know why I did it differently then. I think the energy does have to continue till the end, so that was weird how I delivered that line. I think as pre-Act 2 finale scenes go, I think this is a really good one. Like, I don't think it's as good as a lot of the scenes that have been in this opera, and it'll probably still come relatively low in the pack, but I really like it, actually. It's got loads of great stuff in it. Everyone gets their story wrapped up, like everyone gets their chance to speak in a way that really does reflect their character and doesn't feel like an afterthought. I do think it is important to contain that bit about the Wheel of Fortune, otherwise Rudolph just says, oh, you're as poor as a rat, and then they just walk up stage together and just they're together. It's odd. When we did it in Grosvenor Light Opera Company, the Baroness and Rudolph actually got together at the end, which I think is actually a really cool and valid choice. I think that's quite nice because you do sometimes feel a bit weird about the fact that they're not together. But I suppose if you make it into a thing that, like, well, the Baroness did just completely throw Rudolph away when she realised, oh, I can be the Grand Duchess anyway and just marry Ludwig instead. So she clearly sees these people as interchangeable. And also, you do get the impression that she's quite a lot older than him. And so maybe when she meets the prince, who I know that people have inserted in lines of kind of him, you know, inviting her to have a drink or something, he's like definitely like a better match for her than Rudolph is, because Rudolph, he's just not as kind of fabulous and confident as her. The only thing I don't like about this scene is the kind of weird, like, gross language that Rudolph uses towards the princess. Like, oh, you're a pretty little girl, you know. I don't like that. But the speed at which this scene moves, it's amazing. Everything gets wrapped up so quickly and with so much emotion. I would say it's maybe not quite as good as the Iolanthe one, but it's better than the Ruddigore one. Even though it's a similar kind of like Deus Ex Machina type of thing, but that does make sense. It's not just completely come out of nowhere. In fact, Iolanthe is probably like the silliest one of all of them, because it's just the insertion of a single word into a document will do it. This is also one of the only scenes where you can clearly see that Gilbert made a mistake. And I don't even know if Bradley has referred to it. No, in fact, he hasn't. It's interesting, because Ernest says, well, Julia, as it seems that the law hasn't been revived, and as consequently I shall come to life in about 3 minutes. But no, he was never dead. So Ernest has been alive this whole time. And it's interesting that the Bradley doesn't actually refer to that, but
because it did refer to an earlier mistake, which I forgot to draw attention to, which is when Rudolph says to Ludwig, "But what if I was to lose?" When he actually means, "But what if I was to win?" And I think that is, people usually change that, but I just forgot to change it in this video. But it really is interesting because Gilbert doesn't often make mistakes. And one of my worst things is when you talk about things like this on a comment thread and like, oh, well, it's GNS, it's not supposed to make sense. Well, like, it usually does. Like, it's very rare that Gilbert makes mistakes. Like, this is one. And then the issue with, like, John Wellington Wells, has he taken the potion or not? And if he hasn't, then how come Lady Sangersure falls in love with him? Because only people who have taken the potion will feel its effects. Because you would only fall in love with somebody who had also taken the potion. Like, he specifically says that. And maybe, like, that stipulation is what creates a problem. Maybe just removing that stipulation would get rid of the issue. But it is actually quite rare that Gilbert makes mistakes. And it's clear that he didn't really have, like, the same kind of back and forth with whoever was helping him with the script. I mean, maybe it was Sullivan, I don't know. But this script, I mean, people always say, oh, Grandduke's clearly in need of an edit. I mean, maybe. But honestly, there's, like, a lot of great material in it. And it's just that there are just some loose ends that are left which aren't neat. And so maybe there's a small sprinkle of lines that could be slightly shortened. But I think on the whole, I don't think it's obvious at all that this script needs editing. Like, it's better than The Gondoliers. It's better than Utopia Limited in terms of sense and comedy, I think. I would say it's better than most of them in terms of dialogue. But anyway, I'm going to say all this again after. Let us go through the scores for this scene. So I think this is very funny. It's funny because it moves at such a fast pace. The ace counting as lowest, that's like a fun revelation, how angry Rudolph is. I think this has got a lot of emotional dramatic impact because I think we forget that Rudolph being alive, that's like a huge threat. Like, he could just execute everyone once he realised what they were all going to do. But, like, he doesn't do it. Like, the threat just goes away. But certainly, for a time, there is a threat in this scene. So I'm going to give that an 8 for emotional dramatic impact. Character, I'm going to give it a 7 because I do think that there are some good moments, you know, like, especially with Rudolph. And especially with Julia and Ernest. You get to see their little story wrapped up, and that's very nice. Beauty/poetry, I think it's a little bit too rushed to have a lot, but there is a lovely turn of phrase. As Lois, say you're the goest. Yeah, it's not, I could give that a 6. It's kind of a standard line. Yeah, it's okay, Mark. Narrative sense, I think this does wrap up the story very easily. It's just that line with Ernest doesn't make sense. So I'm going to give it an 8. I think it's mostly really good. Comedy, I'm going to give it a 14. I don't think it really fits the strength of the others. That does mean I've got a tie, which I will work out privately. And then we will rank all of the scenes in order. In 14th place, we have the opening scene, which isn't a bad scene at all. It's just that I think I was giving it quite low marks in anticipation of other scenes being funnier. And maybe in retrospect, that actually wasn't very fair because perhaps it should have come above some of these other scenes. But I'm going to stick with it for now. Number 13, I have given to Prince, Ludwig and Duchesses. This is the penultimate scene of the show. It's the one that I just think isn't quite as funny and clean as the others. There's lots of people talking, there's lots going on, and not really in a way that makes it exactly clear and focus what's going on. Number 12, I've given to Rudolph, Chamberlains and Baroness. This is the very long scene. There's loads of good stuff in it, but I do think it might be in need of a trim just because it's difficult to hold an audience's attention unless you've got really strong actors, and this scene is most definitely not actor-proof. Number 11, I have given to the Prince and Ludwig. This is the pre-roulette scene. Loads of good stuff in this scene, especially my favourite, like, too little doddle joke. That is hilarious. Well done. Number 10, I've given to the pre-Act 2 finale scene, as we've just discussed, is actually a very good one. Number 9, I've given to the Prince, Princess and supernumerary scene, which I think is an absolute rollicking ball of fun, and depending on who you've got playing those parts, you're going to have a good time with that scene.
Number 8, I've given to Ludwig and Julia. I think these two characters are very funny, but bizarrely in the one scene they have together, I don't think it's like the funniest scene in the show. There's a lot of material that you have to kind of get around in order to not make Ludwig seem like a bit gross. So yeah, that can be a slight problem. Number 7, I have given to the second scene in the show, the scene before Ernest's song. Love this one. There's lots of stuff going on, but it's clear. Importantly, it's clear. Number 6, I've given to Rudolph's monologue. It's short, but it is absolutely excellent and really takes you on a journey of who Rudolph is, and is quite a diversion from who he was in the scene beforehand. Number 5, I've given to Ernest and Julia in Act 1. I was always so nervous about this scene when performing it as Julia, but I think that now that I know it super well, and I'm no longer freaked out by that first line, which is really long, that she says, will take their position around the court according to their professional importance. And that's a horrible line to get out. And as soon as that's done, like, I'm usually fine. But I think that in the past, the scene had been kind of coloured by that line. But I think that it is actually really, really good. And I like it. Number 4, I have given to Ernest and Julia's second act scene with Lisa making a little appearance. This is a great scene, much more emotional than I'd ever thought it was. It really takes you on quite a dramatic journey. Really like this scene, gives you a chance to kind of show that Julia is redeemable, that she can learn empathy, that she can learn to be a better person. Number 3, I've given to Ludwig, Julia and the Baroness. What a fabulous scene. All that back and forth between Julia and the Baroness. I don't know who you are, ma'am, but I flatter myself I can do justice. Oh, my dear, you're doing admirably. It's just perfect. Because this is the way people speak to each other. It's beautiful. Number 2, I've given to the long quintet scene, which is just laugh after laugh. Then they shouldn't. It's bad form. What a masterful piece of writing this scene is. But the most masterful of all, I have given to the tremendous duologue between Rudolph and Ludwig, which is quite similar in tone to the scene between the tenor and the Patagai in the Mikado. In fact, these top 2 scenes are the scenes that I called out as being remarkably similar in tone to 2 specific scenes in the Mikado. It's very interesting how those then became my 2 favourites. But this Rudolph and Ludwig scene, so many colours, so much fun, so much emotion, and just the level of comedy, the level of Ludwig's genius, and also his ability to just like think on his feet so quickly, and how we can watch him do that. And he lets us in, he lets us see how he's doing it. And the way Rudolph is still trying to get money off. It's just amazing. Like, this scene is fantastic. So I really hope this video has made you think a little bit differently about the Grand Duke, if you were one of those people that thought, well, I love the Grand Duke, I'm fond of it, but I do think the dialogue needs a trim. Well, like, yeah, maybe like a tiny bit, but really not too much. Like, on the whole, this dialogue is great. And I think with extremely minimal trimming, and I'm talking like maybe in total like 2 sentences, because I'm not really including the material that isn't usually included anyway. Like, I might even put some of that back in. I'm just talking about maybe like the last line that Rudolph has before the Rudolph and Baroness duet. Like, maybe that line I would cut. And then maybe I would cut the line about, would you take a guarantee? No, a guarantee would be equally open to objection. Like, literally, like, those 2 lines, I think, are the only things I would still cut that are not usually cut. And I want to get the Zoological Gardens line in. That's one that I didn't talk about, actually, because I didn't think I was able to get the line in because it would ruin his thrusting nature line that Julia says. But I actually don't think it would. Let me tell you how to do that. So that little section of the scene would run thus.
Ludwig is far from being a baboon.
Yes, I should never do that. If I were chairman of this gang, I should hesitate to enrol any baboon that couldn't produce satisfactory credentials from his last zoological gardens.
Poor boy, he couldn't help giving us away. It's his trusting nature. He was deceived.
So if you do it like that, you don't interrupt the lovely "he was deceived." His trusting nature. If I were to speak to you in my own life. Even the line "he was deceived," I may consider cutting, just so you can get to his trusting nature. His trusting nature. That's often a bit cleaner. I remember saying, because I would always almost accidentally come in, even after doing like 12 performances of Julia, when I did it with Christina as Lisa in this like last summer. I remember in rehearsals, I'd always try and cut her off, like, I'm really sorry. And then I remember with my Julia, Harriet, in the Grosvenor Light Opera Company, she cut me off a couple of times. She's like, "Oh, I'm really sorry." I'm like, "No, honestly, like it's the hardest little bit to remember that Lisa still got to say." And I said to her, "Look, I'm going to leave the slightest pause before the line. So if you come in with your line early, I know just to stop, and I'm ready to just stop if you say it." But actually, she never forgot to let me say it, so it was absolutely fine. But that is something that I may consider cutting, because everyone who's ever played Julia really doesn't want that line to be there. It's very hard not to just come in with his trusting nature earlier. But like literally, okay, that's three lines I consider cutting, and one is just literally 3 words. So honestly, this is great dialogue. So please, in the comments, if you still do not like this dialogue, please tell me what it is that makes it so definitely worse than the others. When you think about Yeoman, there are a ton of moments that are superfluous, that maybe fall a bit flat. I certainly had way more fun filming this one than I did with the Yeoman dialogue. Even Iolanthe, I mean, has its kind of superfluous moments. Pirates of Penzance, I mean, that is really funny, and but I don't know. The thing is, I don't think that anything in Pirates of Penzance is funnier than the "then they shouldn't. It's bad form." That is one of my favourite moments in all of GNS. And HMS Pinafore, you know, that dialogue is fine, and in The Sorcerer, yeah, that's good. But honestly, the Grand Duke, I think, is maybe my 3rd favourite. I've not done Ruddigore yet, so I don't know if it'll be 3rd or 4th, but that's where I'm suspecting it might end up, to be absolutely honest with you, because I absolutely love these scenes, and I cannot see the problem with them. I think I used to think I did see the problem, but I think I was just brainwashed. I was brainwashed by everyone telling me, "Oh, the Grand Duke's a problem." But maybe it is literally just that you need good actors to do it. And a lot of people who do GNS are not good actors. And I don't mean to sound mean, but you know that's true. It's mainly singers. And this is why Gilbert cast actors. Like, it's not all about the singing. And this one, like, it kind of makes me mad, that does as well. Just because people find this one hard to do, because it requires people who are actually skilled at acting rather than just skilled at singing, they have the audacity to say that it's the material that's the problem. Maybe it's you that's the problem. How'd you like them apples? A lot, I would think. Thank you very much for watching this video. This was tremendously fun, but also very long to make. A lot longer than I thought it would be, this one. I had a lot to say. That dialogue, oh, there were so many takes. All that French, yeah, that was tough. But you got through it, I got through it, and we came out the other side, knowing a little bit more about the Grand Duke. Even me. And I will bid you goodbye, auf Wiedersehen, and au revoir.